It seemed like the labor pains had started. As a first-time mom, I was filled with anxiety, especially since I was so far from my hometown and returning for the birth wasn't an option. Thankfully, my in-laws' house was just a 10-minute walk away, and with our good relationship, I planned to rely on them if needed. My due date was yesterday, and just as my husband left for work, I started feeling what I suspected were labor pains. I had just arrived at work, but I knew the baby wouldn't arrive immediately. I decided to keep an eye on things and let my husband know if anything changed. Despite my growing anxiety, my husband George seemed strangely indifferent. Reflecting on it now, I realized his behavior had been off for a while. My name is Ellie. At 32, I'm a full-time housewife, having left my job upon discovering I was pregnant. George, who is 2 years older than me, was a senior at the university I attended. We reconnected at a university club gathering 3 years ago, and our chemistry was immediate. Given our age, we decided to marry soon after. I was thrilled to marry while still in my late 20s. George's demanding job often keeps him late or requires him to work on his days off, which only heightens my anxiety. Fortunately, my mother-in-law has been a tremendous support, especially during the rough patch of morning sickness. She's eagerly anticipating the arrival of her grandchild, and I want to ensure a healthy delivery for her sake. My father-in-law has also been incredibly helpful, driving me to the hospital when needed. I'm truly blessed with such wonderful in-laws. Yesterday was my due date, and my anxiety spiked as I noticed no signs of labor starting. I voiced my concerns to George before he left for work, but he seemed irritated and hurried. If the labor pains haven't started, it means it's not time yet. There's no point in overthinking it. The baby will come when it's ready, he said dismissively before heading out. I wasn't asking for him to do anything specific. I just wanted him to understand and empathize with my anxiety. We had this argument several times during my pregnancy, with George insisting that overthinking won't change anything and that things will work out in their own time. Maybe he's right, but giving birth feels like a matter of life and death. His indifference during my severe morning sickness and painful contractions only added to my frustration. When we first discovered I was pregnant, George was overjoyed. I vividly remember his excitement when we went shopping for baby supplies together. He was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a dad. However, as time went on, his attitude shifted. By the time I reached the stable phase of my pregnancy, he had become noticeably distant. It might have been because work was particularly demanding, but I wished he would be more attentive and caring. Despite these feelings, I've managed to get through each day. Even today, a day past my due date, George left for work with his usual demeanor. Despite my frustrations, I focused on the well-being of our baby and managed to see him off with a calm expression. About an hour later, I began experiencing what felt like labor pains. I called the hospital, but they advised me to wait since my contractions were still spaced apart. I packed my hospital bag and tried to rest while keeping an eye on the time. By the afternoon, the contractions became more frequent, so I took a taxi to the hospital. I attempted to call George, but he didn't answer, so I sent him an email before admitting myself. Since my in-laws were at work, I couldn't rely on them for support. From that point on, all I could focus on was enduring the intense pain. It was excruciating, and I felt utterly alone and anxious, nearly passing out from the discomfort several times. George finally arrived at the hospital in the evening, but to my dismay, he seemed to have been drinking. Really? Of all days? When I mentioned I was in labor, he brushed it off, saying, "I had a sudden drinking party, but I only had one beer." He seemed almost proud, as if having just one beer was something to be commended. It drove me crazy. What? Even one beer is still drinking? You reek of alcohol. Don't come near me like this. Just leave. Between the sharp belly itches and the stench of alcohol, I could hardly think straight. Fortunately, a nurse came in and promptly escorted George out, leaving me alone once more. I spent a restless night, and before I knew it, morning had arrived. It seemed the baby was about to be born soon. After moving to the delivery room and waiting for a while, George eventually came in, looking like he had sobered up. I wanted to ask, what does he want now? But I was too exhausted to even speak. Finally, my son was born safely. Despite the near overwhelming pain, I felt a profound relief when I heard my baby's healthy cry. When the nurse handed my son to George, he hesitated but took him in his arms. As I vaguely thought, so he's a dad now, George made an outrageous comment. He doesn't look like me at all. Whose kid is this? Saying that, George handed our son back to the nurse. I was stunned and glared at him, unable to make sense of what was happening. "Get out," I said firmly, despite the pain making it difficult to speak. George left the room without a word. What was he thinking? How could he act like this? I was too angry and drained to dwell on his behavior, focusing instead on the situation at hand. My son was taken to the nursery, and I was moved to my room. Though I was seething, exhaustion eventually overtook me, and I fell asleep without realizing it. The days flew by as I focused on caring for my son during my 5-day hospital stay. George visited occasionally, but since we were in separate rooms, our time together was brief. My mother-in-law came to pick me up when I was discharged, while George reportedly went back to work. She seemed unaware of George's earlier behavior and showered our baby with affection, constantly remarking on how cute he was. My father-in-law, who had left work early, also came by to help. With them looking after our son, I was able to get some much-needed rest. I was deeply grateful for their support. In the evening, while my mother-in-law was preparing dinner, George came home. I greeted him with a welcome back, but he responded coldly and without warmth. As soon as he entered the living room, he pulled an envelope from his bag, completely ignoring our son. With a smirk, he called me over. "Ellie, I need to talk to you." I was already irritated by his demeanor, but what happened next was even more shocking. George pulled out some documents from an envelope and shoved them in my face. "I had it tested. The baby isn't mine, so we're getting a divorce. This proves your affair." I let out a stunned gasp, and my mother-in-law's cooking came to a halt. My father-in-law, who was holding our son, froze in disbelief, staring at George. Despite the stunned silence that filled the room, George looked utterly smug. When my son was born, I couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't resemble me at all. Out of curiosity, I decided to secretly have a DNA test done. When the results came in, George insisted we review them together. He handed me the document, which was filled with complex terminology and numbers. I zeroed in on a key sentence. The tested individual cannot be excluded as the biological father. "George, cannot be excluded means I'm the father, right?" "What? Do you have zero reading comprehension?" George replied with a calm smirk. "If you're not excluded, it means you are the father." George started to panic. "What? No way." As I recalled the events of the birth, my anger flared up again. "So all those accusations were because you suspected me of cheating?" I vividly remembered him asking, "Whose kid is this?" when he first saw our newborn son. I placed the document in front of my in-laws, who were livid. "George, how could you do this to Ellie while she was going through so much?" They scolded him. As his parents reprimanded him, George began to make excuses. "Well, the office is full of men, and she often went to drinking parties. She came home late some nights, so naturally, I was concerned." I felt a surge of irritation at George as he glanced at me while speaking. "I reported every drinking party to you, and you even picked me up when I was going to be late, and still, you doubted me." But George continued to act as if he were in the right. "Well, I've read about people raising their partner's child on the internet. A coworker suggested I get a DNA test." "Oh, I see. There's probably no point in discussing this further with him," I thought. "Really? You trusted random stories and the advice of a stranger over me?" My anger flared. "I endured morning sickness and a grueling labor to give birth to a healthy child for you, George, and this is how you repay me." My mother-in-law started to cry, and my father-in-law was visibly enraged. "I can't believe this," he said. As I angrily knocked the documents from George's hand, he fumbled to pick them up, accidentally dropping his bag. To my shock, something unexpected fell out. "What's this?" Inside George's bag was a divorce form. "Are you planning to divorce me suddenly?" George's earlier confidence vanished, leaving him flustered. "No, this isn't, I could no longer tolerate his behavior. You've gone through the effort of preparing divorce papers, and now you're saying you don't want to divorce." I grabbed the divorce papers and tightly gripped a pen. As I prepared to sign, George tried to stop me, but just then, his smartphone rang with an incoming email. My hand paused, a sinking feeling washing over me. When had his behavior and words started to seem so off? It had been strange since summer, after spring had passed. What was this unease? Driven by impulse, I snatched George's phone, holding it away from him as he panicked. I unlocked the screen and was shocked by what I saw. I read aloud. "Have you filled out the divorce papers yet? It wasn't your child anyway, right? Claim alimony from your wife and let's go on a lavish trip." What's this? My intuition had been right. I was puzzled by your sudden accusations of cheating and wondered where they came from. Could it be that you're the one who's been unfaithful? That's why you suspected me of cheating, isn't it? George's face went pale. Who is this woman? Could she be a new employee or something? You must have become the point of contact for new hires this spring and got close to her. I continued calmly. That makes sense. Your behavior changed because you were cheating on me. That's why you were coming home late and claiming to work on holidays. Probably just going on dates. Seeing that George remained silent, it seemed my assumptions were hitting close to home. Hearing this, my father-in-law's anger flared up again. Is this true? As George avoided eye contact, my father-in-law's fist connected with his face. Turning to me, my father-in-law bowed deeply. Ellie, I'm truly sorry for my foolish son. George, now bowing alongside his father, was subjected to a stern interrogation. You should be the one apologizing. Tell the whole truth. The woman George had been involved with matched my suspicions. She was a younger employee who had transferred from another branch, and since George was responsible for her training, their affair had developed from there. It turned out she was also married, though she didn't have children. Stunned, I quickly completed the divorce papers and thrust them at George. Sign these immediately. Ellie, I'm sorry. Please reconsider. I admit my mistakes, George pleaded. I could only regard him with cold detachment. No, I won't reconsider. I don't need someone who abandons me in my time of need. I don't want to see your face again. Since you doubted our son's paternity, you don't need to be a part of his life either. However, I will be seeking child support. With my father-in-law as a witness, George filled out the divorce papers. We also discussed alimony and child support. During this time, my mother-in-law, who had taken our son away temporarily, returned. She silently handed something to George. Confused, he opened it to find an old photo album. Inside was a picture of a baby who bore a striking resemblance to our son. It looks just like him. There's no way he's not your child, my mother-in-law said coldly. These are pictures from when George was born. He resembles our son exactly. George's shock was evident, but he doesn't look anything like me. He began to make excuses. At that point, my patience snapped. If a newborn baby looked exactly like you as an adult, wouldn't that be unsettling? Clearly from the photo, it's obvious that this child is yours. No, it's not that. It's just that everyone kept saying it. I believed it from the start, George stammered. Liar. If you truly believed it, you wouldn't have demanded a DNA test. You're always shifting the blame. Take responsibility for your actions. You neglected your pregnant wife and had an affair. That's a fact. And now you're letting your mistress sway you, ducking your wife, and conducting a DNA test on your own child. Is there any sincerity in any of this? No. I was suffering while you were unfaithful. I'm not so generous as to forgive such betrayal. I let loose on George without pausing for breath. Despite his constant apologies, I couldn't find it in me to forgive him, and we proceeded with the divorce. The rumors about George's affairs quickly spread at work, making his job increasingly difficult and leading to a series of mistakes. Consequently, he was transferred to a different branch in Nebraska. I considered moving back to my parents' house, but given the challenges of traveling long distances postpartum, I decided to stay in George's now empty family home. My son is growing up healthy here, and I'm settling in well. George's parents gave him a severe reprimand, and he's been using his savings to pay alimony, closely monitored by my father-in-law. He makes his payments every month. We also pursued damages from the woman he had the affair with. Her husband discovered the betrayal, leading to their divorce. I heard she's now working at a bar. Though George was a foolish husband, I am deeply grateful for the support of my in-laws. They've been a strong presence in my life as I raise our son. I'm very satisfied with the way things have turned out.
Holly's life could hardly be called happy. When she was very young, her mother died tragically at the factory. Her father decided it would be best to move in to his mother. The man struggled deeply with his wife's death and, as often happens, began to drink. Over time, his drinking worsened. Now, arguments erupted between her grandmother and father due to his drinking. One winter day, Holly returned from school to find her father frozen in a snowdrift. The girl had just turned 13. Thus, she became an orphan and was left in her grandmother's care. Her grandmother declined rapidly after the loss of her only son. She often sat by the window crying and saying she couldn't believe her boy was gone and was waiting for him to return. In those moments, Holly was terrified. It seemed to her that her grandmother had truly lost her mind and didn't understand that her father was gone. However, the woman would distract herself and return to reality for a while. But Holly was still afraid that something might happen to her grandmother. Holly finished school and enrolled in a nursing school. She was very capable and succeeded in her nursing school. After graduation, Holly was assigned to a small town where she met her first husband. She fell in love with him instantly and completely. The world ceased to exist for her. There was only Carlos and everything related to him. Everything else faded into the background. They married 6 months after meeting. A year later, their son Eric was born. It seemed that true happiness had finally come to Holly. Life began to improve for the first time in many years. Holly felt genuinely happy, but 3 years after their son's birth, Carlos died. He worked in construction, and a collapse occurred, crushing him under a concrete slab. Thus, Holly became a young widow, raising her son alone. Time flew by unnoticed. Eric had grown up. He had just turned 13. Holly was returning home from her shift and thinking about how she and her son would visit her grandmother. She had a vacation coming up, and her son had spring break. Holly's relationship with Grandma was strained. Her grandmother was upset that Holly rarely visited, and no explanations satisfied her, although she knew that her granddaughter was a widow, raising a son and working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Holly was about to cross the street when she heard a strange noise. She looked around and saw a man in the bushes. Her nurse instincts kicked in immediately, and she rushed to help. "Sir, don't move, you shouldn't. Where does it hurt? What happened?" Holly quickly asked.
"My head. Someone hit me from behind,"
the man whispered. Holly called an emergency service and requested help while examining the man and providing first aid. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes and took the injured man to the hospital. He had a moderate concussion and multiple soft tissue contusions. 3 weeks later, Holly was walking home when she heard someone call out, "Miss, please wait a moment." Holly turned around and saw a man hurrying toward her. She looked around, but there was no one else, so he must be calling her, but she didn't recognize him. "Excuse me, are you talking to me?" Holly asked. Yes, you. Please don't rush off, I need to speak with you." "I'm sorry, but what about?" Holly asked, puzzled. "I don't believe we've met." "Not exactly," the man smiled. Holly looked at him closely again and thought, "No, I'm sure I don't know him. I would remember such an interesting and handsome man." "You saved me," the man said. "Ah, now I see," Holly realized. "You're the man who was attacked recently. I'm so glad you're recovering. Did they find who attacked you?" "Yes, they did. It was my ex-wife's brother. We had a difficult divorce and he blamed me for it. He decided to punish me in this strange way." "That's terrible. I'm glad you're all right. Head injuries can be very dangerous," Holly said sympathetically. "But why were you looking for me?" "To thank you, of course," the man smiled. "I'm Douglas." He extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Douglas. I'm Holly." "I'm sorry I don't have flowers, but I wanted to invite you to dinner at a restaurant. Your husband won't mind, will he? It's just a thank you dinner for saving me." Holly immediately thought of Carlos. Despite the passing years, she still loved her husband deeply, and every time someone asked about him, tears welled up in her eyes. The pain was still raw. In all the years since his death, Holly had not been with another man. Her friend Cassandra scolded her, saying it wasn't healthy and that she should find someone, even just for companionship. But Holly couldn't imagine anyone else touching her. She still loved her husband, but now, looking at Douglas, before he mentioned her husband, Holly found herself thinking that she liked him. There was something magnetic about Douglas that drew Holly in. He noticed the change in her expression and quickly apologised. "I'm sorry, did I say something wrong?" "No, it's all right. I'm a widow. I don't have a husband," Holly explained. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. That was awkward of me." Douglas sincerely apologised. "It's okay, Douglas, you didn't know, and I understand you didn't mean to. It's just still a sensitive topic for me." "Your husband passed away recently?" "Many years ago. He died in a construction accident." Douglas looked at Holly in surprise. This beautiful young woman still remained faithful to her late husband, which was quite rare these days. He decided not to comment further and changed the subject. "Do you live nearby?" "Yes, that's my building over there," Holly pointed. "I'll accept your invitation to dinner, Douglas, but let's make it tomorrow. I'm exhausted today." "Of course, tomorrow it is. Where and when would you like to meet?" "How about Imperia? The prices are reasonable and the food is good. Around 7 o'clock? "Sounds perfect. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. at Imperia. I'll be looking forward to it." He kissed her hand goodbye and walked briskly to his car parked nearby. Holly watched him leave, feeling a magnetic pull towards him. She decided to ask her friend Cassandra for help in preparing for the date. "Hey, Cassandra, I have some news for you. You might want to sit down." "Hey, did you win the lottery?" Cassandra joked. "No," Holly laughed. "It looks like I have a date tomorrow." Cassandra feigned a dramatic fall. "I'm fine, except for falling off my chair," she joked. "And who is this date with?" Holly briefly recounted her first encounter with Douglas. "Great!" Cassandra smiled. "But what does he do? What does he look like? Although, if you agreed to go out with him, he must be quite attractive." "Oh, stop it," Holly smiled. "So will you help me?" "Of course. We need to find you a proper dress. I'll be at your place by 4 and make you look like a queen tomorrow. And don't worry about Eric. I'll take him to my place and you can relax and enjoy your evening. I hope your date goes well." "Oh, stop it. I just want to talk to him." The next day, Cassandra arrived earlier than planned. By then, Holly had already done her manicure and makeup. However, when Cassandra saw Holly's makeup, she insisted she wash it off immediately. "Are you kidding me? Who are you planning to impress with that makeup?" Cassandra scolded. "Wash it off and sit down." Holly obediently went to wash her face. Truth be told, she had never been good at makeup and rarely wore it, so Cassandra's help was invaluable. "What would I do without you?" Holly said, returning from the bathroom. "You'd have come to the restaurant looking terrifying," Cassandra laughed. "Seriously, you do so much for me and help me out all the time. You must have been sent by God to keep me from going crazy with my life," Holly continued. "Stop it, you're making me blush. Everything will be all right for you, I promise," Cassandra reassured her, though she knew Holly's life had indeed been difficult. "Let's not dwell on the past and focus on the future, specifically tonight. Did you pick out a dress?" "Yes, I'll show you." Holly jumped up and brought out a dress. Cassandra looked at the dress and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was a pale red dress with large white stripes, at least a decade old, and looked very worn. "You were going to wear this? Are you joking? How old is this dress?" "I don't wear dresses, you know that. This is from my past life." "Well, let it stay in the past. Here." Cassandra went into the hallway and returned with a bag. "I brought 3 dresses for you to choose from. Good thing we're the same size. Pick the one you like best." Cassandra took out a dark blue dress and held it up to Holly. "I think this one will look great. Do you like it?" Holly put on the dress, but it was too short. Cassandra could tell from Holly's expression that she wouldn't leave the house in it, so she took out another dress, a dark burgundy, almost black, long dress with a tasteful neckline. Try this one. It will suit you perfectly. Holly put on the dress, and at that moment, Eric ran into the room and stopped, staring at his mum. "Mum, you look so beautiful in that dress." "Well, that settles it," Cassandra said. "A man has spoken, and we should listen. It really suits you." Holly went into the hallway and looked at herself in the mirror. The dress was magnificent. She looked like a queen. Cassandra paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's too good for me. I can't wear it." "Are you out of your mind? You're a stunning woman. You should wear dresses like this every day," Cassandra scolded. "We'll do your makeup and hair beautifully, and you'll captivate every man in the restaurant." "I'll feel uncomfortable in this dress," Holly protested. "Maybe I should just wear jeans and a shirt. After all, I can go to a restaurant dressed like that, and no one will kick me out for my appearance." "Yes, exactly," Cassandra agreed with a serious expression. "Wear whatever makes you most comfortable. You could even wear a tracksuit and slippers. No one will kick you out, although the man you invited to dinner might regret it 10 times over and run away as soon as you leave the restaurant." All right. No need to exaggerate. I'm just saying. He liked me in my everyday clothes," Holly tried to argue. "And? To truly impress a man, you need to put in some effort. Do you think you can impress him with jeans? I highly doubt it. Enough chatter. Sit down. We're going to make you beautiful." Holly knew arguing with Cassandra was pointless, so she obediently sat in the chair. By 7 o'clock, Cassandra had finished working her magic, and Holly was finally allowed to see herself in the mirror. She was astonished by her reflection. Then she turned and hugged her friend. "Thank you so much. I feel completely different in this outfit." "Of course you do," Cassandra smiled, pleased with herself. "Now, pack the essentials in your purse. It's in the bag. I brought a universal one just in case. And get going on your date. Eric and I will be rooting for you." "Just don't tell Eric where I'm going," Holly remembered to warn. "I don't want him to think his mum is a traitor." "Are you crazy? What kind of traitor? Who are you betraying? You're an adult single woman who has the right to a personal life. Get those silly thoughts out of your head. Besides, your son is very mature for his age. He's asked me more than once why his mum lives alone. And I told him the truth, that it's hard to find someone as good as his dad." "Thank you," Holly said, nearly in tears. The drive to the restaurant only took 10 minutes. Holly gazed out the window, trying to imagine what she would say during dinner. How would she behave? How would Douglas react to her? But she couldn't picture it clearly because she was nervous and hadn't been on a date in a long time. The taxi arrived at the restaurant at 2 minutes to 7. Holly hated being late, so she sighed in relief as she checked the time and was glad she arrived on time. Douglas was waiting for her at the entrance. Holly spotted him as they pulled up. He, however, didn't notice her, even as she stepped out of the car. He must have thought she would walk. "Are you waiting for me?" Holly asked, approaching her date. Douglas turned around and was speechless. He opened his mouth, but couldn't say a word. He was stunned by her appearance. "Is everything all right? Or should I use my professional skills and provide first aid?" Holly smiled. "No, I'm fine," Douglas finally managed to say. "Shall we go inside?" Holly suggested. "Yes, of course," Douglas agreed, still admiring her from every angle. He clearly hadn't expected such a striking entrance. As they sat down at the table, Douglas helped Holly with her chair and quickly took his own seat across from her. Holly smiled at his bewilderment and disorientation. She had planned to make an impression, but she hadn't expected such a reaction, and she liked it. Once he regained his composure, Douglas showered Holly with compliments. She listened, blushing with embarrassment. It had been a long time since anyone had said such nice things to her. It wasn't that there hadn't been men trying to win her heart over the years, but she hadn't responded to them. Now, however, she enjoyed listening to the compliments and the company of this interesting and impressive man. Over dinner, they talked a lot about their pasts. Holly told him about Eric, and Douglas confessed that he loved children, but his ex-wife couldn't have them, which was one of the reasons for their divorce. "That must be hard for a woman when she can't have children," Holly sympathised. "Unfortunately, my ex-wife didn't really want them. She preferred to live for herself and her own pleasure. Sometimes that's just how it is," Douglas said. "Let's change the subject," Holly suggested. "Tell me, what do you do for work?" "I'm a business analyst. I work in the consulting department." "And you work in medicine, right? For how long?" "I'm a nurse. You don't have any relatives?" Douglas asked. "No, I only have my grandmother. But she lives far away in the countryside and is quite elderly. I wanted to bring her to live with us in the city, but she refused. She's a village person, and my husband was an orphan. He had no one." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Well, I've grown used to this situation. The most important thing is that I have my son." They talked and laughed for a long time, recalling funny incidents from their childhood and school days. Holly was surprised at how easily she could communicate with this almost stranger, having only seen him 3 times in her life. After the restaurant, Douglas suggested a walk, but Holly was too tired. "Douglas, I'm sorry, but I don't have the energy for a walk," she admitted. "How about we take a taxi and drive around the city?" Douglas suggested. "That sounds wonderful. I love the city lights at night." Douglas called a taxi, and they drove through the city centre. The streets were quiet, allowing them to enjoy the nighttime beauty. Then they finally arrived at Holly's apartment. Douglas was sitting close to her, his cologne making her slightly dizzy. "If I invite him in, he might think I'm easy, but I really want him to stay," Holly thought, trying to find a reason to prolong the evening. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she asked finally. Douglas turned and looked at Holly. He was a grown man and perfectly understood exactly what it was about. "I'd love to," he agreed, paying the taxi driver. They went upstairs, and coffee was the last thing on their minds. A few months later, Douglas proposed, and Holly accepted. He had won over Eric, charmed Cassandra, and even impressed her granny during a visit. To Holly's surprise, her grandmother, usually strict and critical of men, approved of Douglas. Holly was overjoyed. She couldn't believe her life had taken such a wonderful turn. Douglas helped around the house, cooked, and spent every weekend with his family. He played with Eric, took him to the park, and drove him to his activities. He treated Holly with immense care, and she blossomed under his attention. This happiness lasted for nearly 5 years, until Eric graduated from high school and enrolled in a university in another city. After Eric's departure, things began to change rapidly. Douglas started coming home late from work, sometimes working weekends and frequently travelling for business. Holly struggled to understand the sudden change in her husband. One evening, Douglas called to say he would be late again. Holly hung up the phone and burst into tears. She felt hurt that he didn't seem eager to come home and offered no explanations. Holly called Cassandra, her voice trembling with tears. "He's staying late at work again," she sobbed. "Maybe he really is busy with his new position," Cassandra suggested. "Cassandra, he was promoted a year ago. Even then he wasn't like this. I don't understand what's happening." Have you tried talking to him? Yes, many times, but he avoids the conversation. Holly cried. Let's think logically, Cassandra said, trying to calm her friend. There must be a reason for his behaviour. Maybe he's having health issues and doesn't want to worry you. Seriously, if he gets a splinter, he talks about it for 2 days. Maybe trouble at work? Cassandra continued. I don't know. He doesn't talk about it. I still think you need to try to talk to him, Cassandra insisted. All right, I'll try, Holly agreed, hanging up the phone. She took a deep breath and dialed Douglas's number. Douglas, is everything all right? She asked. Yes, just a lot of work. It's the end of the quarter, and I need to prepare a report, he explained impatiently. I understand, but we've grown distant, don't you think? Holly, I'm at work. We can discuss this at home, not during business hours. I'm busy, Douglas snapped. All right, I'm sorry. I'll leave dinner on the stove if you want to eat when you get home. Fine, Douglas said, hanging up. Holly decided not to dwell on it and headed to the bathroom. She drew a hot bath with bubbles to relax, but her thoughts kept returning to Douglas's strange behaviour. A man cannot change in such a short time, just like that, without reason. And he began to talk to her reluctantly, as if with a favour, and could yell on the phone, hiding behind the business. That's never happened before. Holly almost fell asleep in the bathroom. Scared that she might drown, she quickly got out of the bath, wiped herself down, put on her pyjamas and went to bed. Around 6 a.m, Holly was awakened by a phone call. She answered, her voice still groggy with sleep. Is this Holly Arcos? An unfamiliar voice asked. I regret to inform you that your grandmother has passed away suddenly. Holly burst into tears. She couldn't believe that her beloved grandmother, her only remaining family besides Eric, was gone. I'll be there as soon as possible, she managed to say. Hanging up, Holly stared at the ceiling, trying to process the news. Her grandmother was 86 years old, and although her death was not entirely unexpected due to her age, it was still a shock. Holly remembered how her grandmother would refuse various treats so that Holly could have more, how they would go to the forest together to pick mushrooms and berries, and how her grandmother would bake the most delicious pies, while her health still allowed it. Yes, she had a difficult personality, but she loved her granddaughter as much as her tough and sometimes harmful nature permitted, and Holly was very grateful to her for not giving her up to an orphanage, for not abandoning her, but for raising her to be a good person. This was indeed a great achievement of her grandmother. The young woman dialed her husband's number, but there was no answer. Fine, I'll manage without help. I'll do it myself. She called Eric. Holly knew it was very early, and her son was probably still asleep, but he needed to know what had happened and had to go with her to arrange the funeral. Eric answered with a sleepy voice. Yes, Mum, what's wrong? Why so early? Son, Grandma has passed away. She died? Oh, no, Eric said, now more awake. I'll take a shower and head over to you. No, go straight to the village. I'll get ready and head out too. Holly was glad she had raised her son so well, sensitive, caring, understanding, with the right outlook on life and relationships. She had never been ashamed of her son. She tried calling Douglas again, but his phone was still off. So Holly left a voicemail. He'll listen to it when he turns his phone on, she thought, and went to pack for the trip. Douglas called back closer to noon. Holly, I'm sorry I fell asleep on the office couch. I didn't have the energy to go home. Yes, I understand. I'm almost at the village now. I don't have time to discuss our issues. I'll be on my way soon, too. All right, Holly said and hung up. After the funeral, the whole family returned to the city. "What are you going to do with that dump?" Douglas asked. "It's not a dump," Holly protested. "It's still a house, and it's the house of my childhood. I don't know what I'll do with it. Maybe I'll board up the windows, or maybe I'll rent it out to someone who needs a place to live." "Who would want to live there? It needs a major renovation." "Then we'll do the renovation and rent it out." "I'm not putting my money into that." "It's not just your money. I make good money too. Maybe we'll move there together when we're old." "No, I won't go there. I'm a city person. I can't live in the countryside." "Either way, I'm keeping it. I'm not selling it." "It's your choice," Douglas agreed calmly and left the kitchen, muttering, "As if anyone would buy that dump, even if they wanted to." Holly struggled with her grandmother's death, and there was little support. Her son was always busy with his studies, and her husband didn't seem to care about what she was going through. Only her best friend Cassandra could listen and sympathize, but Holly didn't want to burden her with complaints and problems. 2 months passed. One day, Holly returned from her shift and heard her husband talking to someone. Entering the kitchen, she saw a young woman sitting at the table. Douglas was standing by the stove making coffee. "Good morning. What's going on here?" Holly asked. The question was entirely appropriate, as Douglas was standing in the middle of the kitchen in just his shorts, and the young woman was sitting by the window in his shirt. "Oh, hi. You're back already?" Douglas asked casually. "Yes, I am, and apparently not at the best time," Holly noted. "Why not the best time? It's the perfect time. Meet Barbara. She's my beloved," Douglas replied calmly. "And who am I then?" Holly asked, genuinely surprised. "You're my wife, and soon an ex-wife." He looked at Barbara, smiled, and turned back to Holly. "You see, Barbara is pregnant. I'm going to be a father for the first time in my life. I can't abandon the woman who is going to make me truly happy." "Congratulations. Pack your things and leave." "No, we're not going anywhere. You see, we have nowhere to live, and I like this apartment. I've put not just my money but my soul into it. So pack your things, dear, and go to your dump in the village," Douglas said, laughing. "Aren't you bothered that he's married?" Holly asked Barbara. "No, it doesn't bother me. Besides, that status is temporary." Barbara laughed. "You can't kick me out of our apartment," Holly said firmly. "I'm asking you nicely to leave. We can't all live together in one apartment. That would be weird. And we have nowhere to go, unlike you. So it is what it is." Holly looked at Douglas in disbelief. It felt as though an entirely different person stood before her, not the man who had courted her, befriended her son, and helped around the house, but a total stranger. She couldn't understand how someone could change so drastically in such a short time. What had influenced him so profoundly? Or who? This woman? Perhaps. But he couldn't just kick his wife out of her own apartment. "Holly, let's not make a scene, okay? I really don't want to argue right now. Besides, my Barbara is pregnant. She shouldn't be stressed." "You're a medic. You understand this perfectly." Suddenly an idea struck Holly. Maybe she should just leave for the village. Let Douglas live as he pleases. Why cling to someone who doesn't even respect her? If he respected her, even if he didn't love her, he would never have brought his mistress here. So what's the point of staying with him? She turned around and silently left the kitchen. She gathered her essentials and left the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Arriving in the village, Holly immediately began cleaning. She always cleaned when she needed to think deeply. Strangely, she didn't cry. She wasn't overly upset or thinking about her husband's betrayal. It felt as though she didn't care, but she did. She had married Douglas because, for the first time since Carlos's death, she felt something for another man, and now she was hurt, but this time by betrayal.
"Hello? Is anyone home?"
Holly heard a voice from outside. She stepped onto the porch and saw a man in his 40s leaning on her gate.
"Can I help you?"
Holly asked.
"Oh, I'm so glad to see you. I've already checked 6 houses and no one answered. I thought this street was deserted."
"Well, the village isn't very lively. Not just our street. What do you need? Are you looking for someone?"
"No, my car broke down. I'm building a farm on the outskirts of the village. I want to breathe life back into our nearby villages."
Holly looked at the man in surprise. "Do you really think that will help revive the nearby villages?"
"I don't think, I know. Not everyone wants to live in the city. Some people would love to move to the countryside if there were jobs available. I'll provide those jobs, allowing people to live in the fresh air and enjoy natural produce. I have a successful complex in the region. I spent several years setting it up, and now it runs like clockwork. I left a manager in charge and came here. I was born here, in a neighbouring village. Now I want to revive my hometown. I have the experience." If Holly hadn't interrupted him, he probably would have talked about his dreams and plans for much longer. "So, how can I help you? Unfortunately, I don't have a car." "Is there your husband around?" "No," Holly replied, lowering her head. For some reason she felt embarrassed and even ashamed that there was no man in the house. Officially there was, but in reality there wasn't. "That's not a problem. You must have tools around. May I take a look?" "Yes, of course. Come in." Holly led the guest to the shed where her grandmother kept various tools. The man searched for a while, but apparently didn't find what he needed. "Didn't you find what you were looking for?" Holly asked. "Unfortunately, no," the stranger replied and turned to leave. At that moment, he hit his head on a hook hanging near the door. Blood immediately started flowing from the wound. Holly rushed to the man to assess the injury. "Don't touch the wound with dirty hands," she commanded. "Come inside, I'll clean it up." "It's just a scratch, no need." The man tried to refuse, but seeing Holly's stern look, he realised it was better to comply. "Wounds from rusty metal must be treated to prevent infection and complications." "Understood," the man agreed, and followed the hostess inside. Holly cleaned the wound and applied a small bandage. "Are you a doctor?" the man asked. "I'm a nurse. Well, I was." Holly paused for a moment and added, "A week ago." "Why in the past? Did you quit? Don't you like your job?" "I love my job and helping people, but circumstances led me to leave. But it had nothing to do with the job." "That's great!" the guest exclaimed for some reason. "What's great? That somebody lost their beloved job?" "No, that this village will have its own nurse. I'll build a medical office, and you can help people, provide first aid, and treat minor ailments that don't require hospitalization." "There's no need to build anything. The village used to have its own doctor. The clinic is there, just abandoned." "Even better! We'll renovate it, and you can see patients there." "And who will pay my salary?" Holly smiled. "I love helping people, but I can't live without money." "I'll pay your salary," the man said, and mentioned the proposed amount. Holly was so surprised that she sat down on a chair. "Is that per month?" "Of course. Is it not enough? I'll increase it once the farm is fully operational." "No, that's a good salary. I agree." "Great, it's settled. We'll start in September. Oh, by the way, what's your name?" The man suddenly remembered. "I'm Holly. And you?" "Nice to meet you, Holly. I'm Henry." The future farmer smiled and extended his hand.
Holly smiled and shook his hand. They exchanged phone numbers and chatted a bit more before Henry left to continue his search for men in the village. Holly stood by the gate, gazing into the distance, marvelling at her luck. She understood that she could return to the city, but at that moment she yearned to live in this house, breathe the fresh air, and immerse herself in the unique energy and familiar scent of her childhood home. Returning inside, Holly was determined to finish cleaning. She entered the far room to roll up the carpet and beat the dust out of it, when she noticed a displaced floorboard. "I am not going to repair the floor any time soon," Holly lamented. She knelt down and tried to fix the floorboard, but it wouldn't budge. Deciding to lift it and put it back in place, she discovered a neatly wrapped package underneath. Holly retrieved the package and tried to figure out what it was. It was huge, and as she began to unwrap it, she felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear. Her heart raced and her palms grew sweaty. What if this was a family secret, best left unknown? She tossed the package onto the floor. "Maybe I should just burn it," she asked herself. But curiosity won out, and she unwrapped the package. As she revealed its contents, Holly felt genuinely ill. The package contained stacks of dollars. "This is a lot of money," she thought. "Where did such a large sum come from?" She noticed a note tucked inside another package and, with trembling hands, unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably her grandmother's. "Dear Holly," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have found your inheritance. When you were born, your father started on saving money for your dowry. After his passing, it was difficult to save. You remember how we lived. I tried not to deprive you, but it wasn't always possible. For some reason, I believed that the future was more important than the present. Later, when you got married, I wanted to give you the money, but I thought you didn't need it at the time. Now that Carlos has passed away, and you are left alone with a small child, you need this money. You are welcome to take it and use it. Forgive me, it's all I could do. Your loving grandmother." Tears streamed down Holly's cheeks. In the last decade, her grandmother had indeed experienced memory issues, often forgetting even her great-grandson's name. She must have forgotten about the inheritance as well. This was a significant sum by their city's standards, and in the village it made her almost a millionaire. Suddenly, an idea struck Holly. What if she invested in the farm's construction? That way, she could secure her future and Eric's. The money would steadily flow into their family budget. She decided to call Cassandra immediately and stepped outside. "Hey, friend, how's it going?" Holly asked. "Hey, you are missing. Did you leave home?" Cassandra replied. "Who told you that?" "Douglas. I stopped by your place today. He said that you ran off with another man," Cassandra said. "Of course I didn't believe that nonsense and planned to call you tonight, but you beat me to it." Holly recounted how she returned home to find her husband with his pregnant lover. He had suggested she leave the apartment to them since Barbara was pregnant, and they had nowhere to live, while Holly now had her granny's house and should go there willingly. Cassandra was furious. "Why didn't you call me right away? We could have kicked that shameless pair out. And why did you leave your mutual apartment to them? You should fight." Cassandra calmed down. "Honestly, I'm glad I left. I've seen for a while now that Douglas has changed. She's pregnant, and he has no children of his own. He's always dreamed of this, and he's not getting any younger. If not now, when? Let him be happy. And the apartment? We'll certainly settle all this at our divorce." "So, you're planning to live in the village from now on? There's no work or decent conditions there," Cassandra said, surprised. "Cassandra, your views on village life are outdated.
There are opportunities here, and I've already found a job, by chance. Plus, I discovered my inheritance. I found a letter from my grandmother today while cleaning. My parents and grandmother had been saving money for me. I inherited a substantial sum. I'll renovate the house and invest in a promising project. I've thought it all through and will live comfortably in the fresh air. Are you sure about this project? What if it's a scam? Cassandra worried. No, it's legitimate. We'll sign an official contract. I've planned everything. I just need to convince one person, but I think he'll agree. Come visit me later. And now I have chores to do. Bye. Holly hung up and immediately dialed another number. Henry? Hi, it's Holly again. Did you fix your car? Yes, thank you, Holly. Were you worried? A bit. I need to meet with you. Is that possible? Of course, tomorrow at 9. I'll be in the village and will stop by your place. See you then. The next day, Henry arrived as promised. Holly had baked a pie and brewed tea. She invited her future partner inside. You wanted to see me? Henry began. Yes, I have a serious proposal for you. Maybe we should chat first. Get to know each other better? Henry suggested with a smile. It's a business proposal, Holly clarified, blushing. Oh, business, that's less interesting. I was hoping for more, Henry teased. Why is it less interesting? Are you refusing already? Holly worried. No, it's interesting. I just hoped it wouldn't be about business. Holly ignored his teasing and explained her idea. I want to be your partner, invest my money in the farm and renovate the medical clinic. What do you think? Henry was visibly surprised, but agreed. Let's make it official with a notary to avoid any issues later. Soon, Holly's life took an exciting turn. She renovated the medical clinic and her home, created a garden, and even installed a pool. News of the village's new medical centre spread quickly, and people came to Holly for help. Over the year, Holly and Henry grew closer. Holly realised she missed him when he wasn't around. She saw that he was not indifferent to her, but he was in no hurry to give signs of attention. One day, Holly couldn't stand it and invited him to dinner, and Henry decided not to miss such an opportunity. He arrived with flowers and a ring. I won't beat around the bush. Will you marry me? He asked. Holly was stunned. Me? Marry you? She teased. Yes, you. Will you? I think... Yes, I will. Henry kissed her gently, and Holly embraced him tightly. 2 months later, they were married. A year after that, Holly gave birth to a daughter. Holly finally felt truly happy with a loving partner and a growing family. Jay stepped out of the restaurant, his coat wide open despite the February chill. He didn't seem to feel the cold. He just wanted to be in the warmth and solitude of his car. There, it was quiet and empty, away from the prying eyes of people, curious, sympathetic, and attentive. Jay opened the door of his new gleaming car and sank into the driver's seat. He had recently picked up this car from the dealership and was as excited as a child. Sheila had even joked about his enthusiasm, saying he must have missed out on playing with toy cars as a kid. Jay imagined them driving this car to the seaside in the spring. Back then, Jay was sure his wife would recover. He didn't doubt it for a moment. What could be seriously wrong with a young, healthy woman? How naive and carefree he had been. Thinking about his wife, Jay's heart ached. He couldn't believe Sheila was gone. Her life had ended so suddenly. She had been ill, and Jay knew it was serious, but he never imagined it would end like this. Treatment wasn't helping, but hope lingered. It seemed that finding the right doctors and the best clinic would make everything right. There were results, but they were short-lived. Her condition would improve in the hospital, and she would be discharged, only to relapse at home. Weakness, worsening test results, pain. In her final months, Sheila became a shadow of her former self. Always slim, the illness had left her gaunt. Her once vibrant hair was dull and thinning, and she barely had the strength to walk to the bathroom or make breakfast. Jay worked a lot. He couldn't just quit his job. He wanted to spend more time with his wife, who needed help, but the treatment was expensive. Fortunately, Sheila had her mother, Patricia, and her childhood friend, Veena, by her side when Jay was away. Veena was a lifesaver for them. She worked remotely, and her flexible schedule allowed her to care for Sheila. She entertained Sheila with conversations, prepared special meals recommended by doctors, reminded her to take her pills, and kept her spirits up by reminiscing about their shared past. Jay was grateful to Veena for everything she did for Sheila and for him. She found the strength to support both Jay and Patricia, who looked heartbreakingly frail. Jay sat in his car, staring blankly at the snowy, frosty street. Winter was wearing thin, and spring seemed far away. It was a season neither he nor Sheila liked. They had met about 5 years ago at a sports club, where Sheila worked as a fitness trainer. Although she primarily led group classes for women, she noticed Jay struggling with the gym equipment and offered him advice. Sheila's natural beauty and warmth immediately captivated Jay. She was tall, slender, with large blue eyes and shiny chestnut hair. Over time, Jay and Sheila grew closer, their friendship deepening as they shared jokes, news and personal stories. Jay, confident and decisive at work, found it challenging to take the first step with Sheila. He feared rejection and the awkwardness that might follow. Fortunately, Sheila took the initiative, inviting him to a concert of a rock band they both enjoyed. The concert was a turning point. Jay finally mustered the courage to confess his feelings to Sheila. The moment seemed perfect. They were strolling through a deserted autumn park, illuminated by tall, bright streetlights and trees adorned with golden leaves. There was no one else around. "You know, I really like you," Jay said resolutely, looking into the large blue eyes of his charming companion. "I mean, you—" "Finally!" Sheila smiled. "I thought you'd never say it. I knew it all along. It was obvious. Why were you so nervous? I really like you too. Honestly." They began dating, enjoying walks around the city, cosy cafe visits, and trips to the countryside. Soon Jay met Veena, Sheila's childhood best friend. The girls had grown up together, living in neighbouring apartment buildings, playing in the same sandbox, and even sharing a desk in first grade. They were inseparable. However, there was something unnatural about Veena, but Jay kept these observations to himself, not wanting to upset Sheila, who was very close to Veena. Sheila worried about Veena's struggles with relationships, and even asked Jay to introduce her to someone, perhaps a colleague or friend. Jay tried introducing Veena to a young unmarried programmer at his work. The programmer was a nice guy but very shy and inexperienced with women, much like Jay once was. Unfortunately, the introduction didn't lead to anything. After the first date, the programmer politely declined further meetings, explaining to Jay that Veena had taken control too quickly, acting like a demanding princess and hinting at expensive gifts and outings. The programmer felt used and didn't want a second date. Jay also disliked Veena's jokes at Sheila's expense. Though meant to be friendly banter, they often seemed to diminish Sheila's achievements and qualities. However, Veena proved to be a true friend to Sheila, always there to help and support her, especially during difficult times. Veena was by Sheila's side until the very end, and she also helped Jay with the funeral arrangements, taking charge when he was overwhelmed with grief. The symptoms of Sheila's illness
had begun to show about a year ago, but neither Jay nor Sheila had paid much attention at first. Sheila started tiring more easily, and after her workouts, she would come home and collapse on the couch, watching TV. Jay would joke about it, but they both dismissed it as a sign of aging. Jay and Sheila had planned to have children and dreamed of a large family. Jay had even started looking at houses in the suburbs, imagining a big garden with swings and a playground for their future children. They enjoyed discussing their plans, and these conversations brought them warmth and comfort. However, they mutually agreed that there was no rush to have children. Jay's job involved frequent business trips, but he was in line for a promotion that would end these trips. Sheila was also focused on her career as a fitness trainer, building her personal brand, and signing contracts with various fitness clubs in the city. They both led active lives and worked hard for their future, feeling that they were still young and had plenty of time. "When will you finally make me a grandmother?" Sheila's mother, Patricia, often asked the young couple. "We will, Mum, we promise," Sheila would reply. "But now is not the right time. We're both focused on our careers." "You can still have a career with a child. If you need help, I'm always here," her mother insisted. "Mum, your heart is weak. I couldn't bear to burden you with an active toddler," Sheila would say. Later, Jay often recalled these conversations and desperately regretted not heeding Patricia's advice. He felt tears welling up in his eyes as he sat in his car, the engine still off. Darkness had fallen, and a snowstorm was beginning. Jay thought about the children he and Sheila had never had. On the one hand, if they had a child, he would not feel so lonely now. There would be a meaning in his life for the sake of whom it would be worth living, doing something, trying. On the other hand, a little boy or girl would have lost the most dear and important person, Mum. Even the mere thought of it made him afraid. Jay took out his phone and began scrolling through the gallery. He was only interested in photos of Sheila. A year ago, her illness had begun to show, but she still looked like herself. She tried to maintain her usual lifestyle, though she could no longer keep up the same pace. Sheila gave up several side jobs and dropped out of courses she had been eager to complete. She lost weight and often felt nauseous. Jay convinced Sheila to get a checkup at the best local clinic, and the doctor delivered shocking news. Sheila had a rare blood disorder. It was terrifying. On Jay's body ran a crowd of goosebumps, but Sheila remained calm, asking the doctor about treatment options and prognosis. However, the doctor could provide few answers. The diagnosis was unclear, making it difficult to determine a treatment plan. Sheila began frequent hospital visits. "Perhaps you should leave the fitness club," the man suggested to Sheila cautiously. "Just for a while, until you get better. You can catch up later." Jay was prepared for his wife's objections, for a heated argument. He knew how much Sheila loved her job. She had admitted more than once that she couldn't live without sports. "But, yes, you're right. That would be for the best. I've been feeling unusually tired lately," Sheila agreed, surprisingly easily. This worried Jay almost as much as her strange undiagnosed condition. Her sudden compliance, the lack of energy and vitality, was alarming. And so the struggle began. Jay's parents called upon all their connections. Sheila was examined by renowned doctors across the country. She stayed in the most advanced clinics, receiving the best treatment, and was even consulted by international medical experts. By her side were her loyal companions, her mother and her childhood friend Veena. Veena visited Sheila often, her work schedule allowing her to come at any time. Jay was grateful for these visits because only Veena could rouse Sheila, persuading her to go shopping or to the movies. The red-haired friend had a miraculous effect on the patient. "She acts as if nothing is wrong," Sheila tried to explain to her husband, "and I start to feel better myself.
It almost seems like nothing has changed. Periodically, Sheila was hospitalised in clinics. No one could give her a precise diagnosis. Standard treatments didn't help, and doctors experimented. What else could they do? The most interesting thing was that the treatment worked. In the hospital, her condition stabilised, her strength gradually returned, and she was discharged for home observation. The treatment continued, but sooner or later, the illness always returned. Her test results worsened, and so did her condition. The doctors shrugged. They had no idea what was going on. They tried new treatment plans and cautiously rejoiced at the subsequent improvements. But then everything would return to square one. Time passed, and Sheila's condition worsened. Jay watched with a heavy heart as his beloved grew weaker, lost weight, and became a shadow of herself. His life now consisted of worries about his wife and the search for doctors willing to take on her complex case. Jay wanted to spend more time with Sheila. She needed round-the-clock support and someone by her side, but he had to work a lot. Quitting his job was not an option. Medical examinations and medications were expensive, and somehow he had to pay the hospital bills. Fortunately, they had Veena. It was Veena, not Patricia, who became Sheila's main helper in this difficult situation. Patricia herself was in a terrible state due to what was happening to her daughter. The elderly woman's heart couldn't take it. She often had to be hospitalized. The stress exacerbated her chronic illness. At first, Jay wanted to hire a nurse, but Veena stopped him. Can you imagine how Sheila would feel with a stranger? Besides, nurses are hired for elderly women or severely disabled people. I don't want my friend to feel like that, Veena said. Jay couldn't disagree with her. Then he offered Veena money, but she firmly refused. Are you crazy? What's wrong with that? You're caring for a seriously ill person. You're spending your time on Sheila. You should be compensated for that, Jay argued. She's my friend. We grew up together. We're like sisters, even closer than sisters. What money? It's not hard for me to sit with Sheila, especially since my work allows it, Veena replied. Jay didn't insist. He knew that Veena didn't earn much and probably needed the money, but she wouldn't take it for helping her friend. On that last evening, Veena and Jay were drinking tea in the kitchen. Jay had stayed late at work and returned later than agreed, but Veena didn't show any sign of displeasure, either with a look or a word. They often had dinner together like this. They talked about Sheila and other things. Being with Veena made Jay feel like everything would be okay. She infected him with her optimism and faith in a happy outcome. Veena often said, "When Sheila gets better." She said it as if she didn't doubt for a moment that it would be so. On that evening, even Veena looked unusually sad and bewildered. Sheila felt terrible all day. I even called an ambulance. The doctors suggested hospitalizing her, but I refused, Veena said. You did the right thing, Jay agreed. He knew that the local hospitals wouldn't be able to help Sheila. Besides, in 3 days, she'll be transported to the capital by a special vehicle. They're ready to receive her there. To the capital? You're talking about this again? Do you think it's a good idea to put her through such stress? Sheila needs peace right now, not more worry, Veena argued. I can't just sit and do nothing, Jay said, shaking his head. He didn't know what was best, but he had high hopes for the doctor there, who was interested in Sheila's case and was already developing a personalised treatment plan. Other doctors had given up on Sheila, shrugging their shoulders and admitting their helplessness. Well, the decision is yours and Sheila's, Veena said, with a smile as she left. Maybe they really can help her there. Who knows? I'll support you and help in any way I can. But Jay's hopes did not come true. That evening he sat by his wife's bed for a long time, holding her thin hand and stroking her hair. She was already asleep. "Get well, please get well," Jay whispered in her ear, not knowing if she could hear him. "As soon as you feel better, we'll go to Greece, to your favourite hotel. You'll wear a white swimsuit, get a tan. We'll be happy and at peace there." That evening, Jay fell asleep unusually quickly. Heavy thoughts did not bother him. Maybe he was just too tired. In the morning, as always, Jay went to check on his wife first thing. There was a sense of anxiety. Usually Sheila woke up at night, asked for water or suffered from pain, and then Jay would give her a shot. But this time there was silence. Sheila lay exactly as Jay had left her. The blankets hadn't even moved. His heart stopped in anxious anticipation. Jay realized the terrible truth even before he touched his wife and felt the icy cold. The worst had happened. Everything that followed felt like a dream. For some reason, Jay called Veena first. She rushed over, took one look at Sheila, cried out and burst into loud sobs. Jay sat in the kitchen, smoking cigarette after cigarette. His mind refused to accept the terrible truth. Seeing Jay's state, Veena quickly pulled herself together, made the necessary calls, and began her bustling activity. It was Veena who organised the funeral. Neither Jay nor Patricia were capable of it in their state of shock and stupor. And now Jay sat here, near the restaurant where Sheila's memorial service had just taken place. It had been a difficult day. Jay had held back his tears and sobs all this time. The man decided he would not go home today. No, everything there reminded him of the tragedy. It would be better to go to a hotel, rent a room for a couple of days, and then, when Jay came to his senses, he would return home and decide what to do with his beloved's belongings. Jay finally started the engine. Suddenly, he felt hungry. He hadn't been able to eat a single bite at the memorial lunch, which was understandable. What was strange was that he could feel hunger at all in such a situation, but his stomach growled insistently. Jay parked at the square and headed towards a kiosk selling burgers, surprised at himself. Suddenly he felt someone's gaze on him. He turned and met eyes as black as the night itself. It was a young gypsy woman. "Help me, please, with whatever you can. My child is waiting at home hungry," the gypsy began her plea. Whether this young lady had a hungry child, Jay didn't even want to think about it. In any case, the girl needed money, since she was asking for it. Why not help? Jay reached into his pocket and handed the gypsy several large bills. "Is this all for me?" "Yes," Jay nodded. "You need money. I have it. What's the problem?" The gypsy smiled enchantingly and hid the money in her waist pouch. "Thank you." Jay nodded and was about to walk away, but the gypsy held him by the sleeve of his jacket. Wait, don't rush. I see trouble has befallen you. Serious trouble. You've lost someone." These words made Jay stop. "You've lost someone dear to you, a wife or a girlfriend, someone you loved and still love so much." The woman's face suddenly took on a sympathetic expression. "How do you know this about me?" Jay asked roughly, shaking the gypsy's hand off his shoulder. "I'm a fortune teller," the girl replied, unperturbed. "My grandmother passed her gift to me. I see you don't believe me, but that doesn't matter. Would you like me to tell your fortune? You gave me so much money. I want to help you in return. I see that something is not right in your story." The gypsy began to gaze intently into Jay's face. The man couldn't look away from her incredibly black eyes. They seemed to draw him in, to enchant him. Suddenly, his mind was empty of thoughts. His heart felt light and pleasant, as if the heavy day and all the sorrows that preceded it had never happened. The rest of the world ceased to exist for Jay. Before him were only two deep black pools. the eyes of the young gypsy. How long did this strange state last? Jay tried to understand later, but couldn't. Maybe a few seconds, maybe several minutes. Then suddenly the gypsy abruptly looked away, and everything returned. The noise of the city, the unbearable heaviness in his heart, the smells, the thoughts. So much pain, the girl finally said, shaking her head. So much pain and despair. I saw the strong bond between you. Now it's being torn apart. That's painful, of course. It's very painful. The girl sighed. But I can see that you don't believe me. All right. Would you like me to tell you what you promised your beloved on her last evening? You promised to take her on a trip to Greece as soon as she recovered. Jay shuddered. He suddenly remembered clearly. Now he was sat by the already sleeping Sheila's bedside, whispering promises of a trip to the sea, urging her to get better soon. No one could have known this. What? What happened to her? The truth won't be easy to hear, the woman sighed. But you need to know because you might be in danger too. I must help you. You're a good person, generous and kind. I'll tell you everything. Are you ready? Jay wasn't sure if he was ready, but he nodded anyway. It was someone close to your beloved, very close, a woman she trusted. She led your beloved to the grave intentionally. I saw a lot of dark envy, so dark it's frightening. I rarely encounter such darkness in people. Red hair. This young woman has red hair. Veena, Jay whispered with horror and disbelief. I can't see names. The gypsy shook her head. Red hair, young, attractive, very malicious and envious. Bad energy. She did something that made your beloved ill. She did it constantly, and she had the opportunity because she was always by her side. Thank you, Jay said, pulling another large bill from his wallet and handing it to the girl. She nodded gratefully, accepting the payment she hadn't expected. Jay turned and walked resolutely back to his car. He had changed his mind about staying at the hotel. He needed to go home and find evidence, and he already had an idea of how to do it. Home without Sheila felt empty, quiet and dark. Things were scattered everywhere. The day before the funeral, Jay hadn't been in any state to keep things tidy. He headed straight to the kitchen, where a hidden camera was installed near the ceiling. Only he and Sheila knew about it. The kitchen also concealed a safe, hidden from prying eyes, where they kept money, valuables and important documents. The safe installer had recommended setting up the camera. Everyone does it these days, just in case. You probably won't need it, but sometimes these recordings are helpful during legal proceedings. Jay had followed the advice and almost forgotten about the camera. But now, after the strange conversation with the gypsy, he realized the installer had been right. He needed those recordings. As Jay drove further from the meeting place with the gypsy, the encounter began to feel less real. By the time he got home, the girl's words seemed like a typical scam, a way to extract more money from a stranger. Perhaps she had even hypnotized him, and everything he heard was just a product of his grief-stricken imagination. But he had to check the recordings just to be sure. The videos should have been stored in the device's memory for up to 3 months. Plenty of time to uncover any wrongdoing. If Vanessa was truly involved, Jay was determined to find out. He spent the entire night in front of his laptop, watching footage from his own kitchen. It was painful to see Sheila, weak and frail, but still alive. The rapid changes in her appearance were starkly evident in the fast-forward. She seemed to fade away day by day, becoming a ghostly figure. Jay watched as he and Sheila shared breakfast, talking and smiling at each other. This was just 2 months ago. Soon after, Sheila took to her bed, and Jay began bringing her meals. Jay paid particular attention to the scenes featuring Veena. Sheila's friend was a frequent visitor, often working from their kitchen table, typing on her laptop, and occasionally preparing meals or taking phone calls. Sometimes she would disappear from the kitchen for extended periods, like watching TV in the living room or spending time with Sheila. The camera only covered the kitchen. Jay noticed something peculiar. Veena was adding a liquid from a small bottle with a red cap to the food she prepared for Sheila. At first, he thought it might be one of Sheila's medications, but the bottle was stored in a cabinet under the sink. An odd place for medicine. Veena seemed to be deliberately hiding it. There was a niche under the sink, a hidden space between the cabinet and the wall where the mysterious bottle was likely kept. Veena added this liquid to everything she gave Sheila: porridge, soups, drinks, even fruit. Then Jay was horrified to see Veena injecting the substance into an apple with a syringe. A chilling realization struck Jay. Could Veena have poisoned Sheila? The video evidence was clear and detailed, leaving little room for doubt. Jay went to the kitchen and opened the cabinet under the sink. He reached into the niche and found the very same bottle with the red cap. It was almost empty, with just a few drops left. This would be enough for analysis. As Jay stood up, his phone vibrated. It was Veena calling. "Hi," Jay answered, trying to keep his voice calm. "How are you? You looked terrible earlier. Should I come over? Do you need my help?" Veena was clearly trying to get into Jay's apartment, perhaps remembering the hidden bottle. "I'm fine," Jay said. "I'm already in bed. No, don't come over. We'll talk later." "All right, but if you need anything, remember, I'm here for you anytime." As soon as Jay hung up, he searched his phone for the number of an old classmate who now worked at the police. He needed advice on where to take his evidence and suspicions, and how to start an investigation. It's not every day you discover that your wife's best friend is a criminal. Once Jay contracted the investigators, the case moved swiftly. With the help of some connections, results came quickly. The bottle contained a highly toxic substance that could cause the symptoms and effects Sheila had experienced. Detecting this substance in the blood is extremely difficult, which is why the doctors hadn't found any traces of poison. There was no longer any doubt that Sheila had been poisoned. The realization was devastating. Jay struggled to accept it, his grief turning to rage. He threw things against the wall, roaring like a wild animal, destroying everything in sight. Surprisingly, the neighbours didn't call the police. Jay knew he could have prevented this, if only he had thought to review the camera footage earlier or sent Sheila to a clinic where Veena couldn't visit. His wife might still be alive. Sheila always improved when away from home, where Veena couldn't tamper with her food. Jay berated himself for not making the connection sooner. The signs had been there all along, but he had been blind to them. Now he was determined to bring Veena to justice and find closure for Sheila's tragic death. Proving Veena's guilt turned out to be more challenging. While the video clearly showed her adding liquid to Sheila's food, the contents of the bottle remained uncertain. The presumption of innocence still held, and Veena's fingerprints on the bottle were not conclusive evidence, as Jay's were also present. Thus, Jay himself came suspected for a time. Veena was called in for questioning, and afterward phoned Jay, shouting and trying to guilt him. "How could you think of such a thing about me? I've known Sheila since childhood, longer than you. She's like a sister to me. I would never harm her. I spent so much time caring for her, and you I saw you adding that liquid to her food with my own eyes, Jay retorted. Jay was relieved that Veena lived on the other side of the city. He felt capable of harming her for what she had done. However, he couldn't risk going to prison. He had responsibilities, his parents, Sheila's mother and his job. He trusted that Veena would be punished according to the law. The investigation uncovered more details. Veena's fingerprints, traces of the substance in her bag, and in the bathroom where she had tried to dispose of the remaining potion. The toxic substance left residues on all surfaces it touched, making it easy to detect even after some time. Traces were even found under Veena's fingernails. The trial proceeded smoothly with abundant evidence. Jay attended every hearing, determined to see justice served. Veena was sentenced to 10 years in a strict regime colony. Though Jay felt the sentence was too lenient, he knew it was the best outcome under the circumstances. Veena glared at him with unconcealed hatred, her eyes filled with despair, fear and rage, but no remorse. Patricia, also present at the sentencing, was devastated. "How could you do this? She trusted you," she cried. "She always thought you were better than me," Veena sneered. Patricia trembled and Jay held her tightly. He felt responsible for her now that she was alone. He vowed never to abandon her. After Veena's conviction, Jay returned to the square, hoping to find the gypsy woman who had revealed the truth about Sheila's death. He wanted to thank her, or perhaps just confirm that their encounter had been real. However, he couldn't find her. Other gypsies and locals had no recollection of the woman he described. Jay was slightly disappointed, but accepted that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. The important thing was that the gypsy girl had helped him find justice for Sheila. 3 years had passed since the tragedy, and much had changed. Jay embarked on a journey of healing, exploring meditation, therapy, and even starting his own business. He sold the old apartment that held so many painful memories and moved to a cosy country home in a picturesque village. Life gradually regained its vibrancy. The sadness and longing for Sheila remained, but Jay found joy in simple pleasures again: a delicious meal, time with friends, the beauty of nature. He even met someone new, a beautiful and understanding woman named Sasha. She was nothing like Sheila, and Jay wasn't trying to replace his late wife. Their relationship developed naturally, and Jay found himself experiencing familiar feelings of joy and warmth. Sasha became his salvation, helping him find happiness again. Sasha knew Jay's story. She had her own losses and tragedies in life. In short, one day they realized that it was time for them to live together. It would be easier and more pleasant that way. Jay and Sasha got married without a lavish ceremony or pomp. Neither of them needed it. Patricia was simply happy for Jay. "That's the right thing to do," she said. "Life goes on. Life continues." The woman had managed to cope with her loss. She found new hobbies: dancing for those over 50, a book club. Patricia lived, socialized, and tried to enjoy life. Jay helped out as much as he could. Patricia and Jay often discussed Veena's actions. Neither of them could comprehend what she had done, and both blamed themselves for not noticing anything earlier. But there seemed to be no warning signs. "Veena was always so polite, so kind," Patricia would say, shaking her head. "She looked you in the eye, smiled, offered help. Her parents were both drinkers, especially her father. They didn't care about their daughter. It wasn't a marginal family, but still not entirely stable. I felt sorry for Veena, took her in, gave her some of Sheila's old clothes. Veena often went to school in old and dirty skirts and blouses, and she was so grateful Saying thank you 100 times, it was almost uncomfortable. She and Sheila were inseparable their whole lives. What happened? Jay would shake his head and hesitate to share his own thoughts with Patricia. He too was tormented by this question. Why? Sheila had always been so kind and warm to her friend, helping her out with money when needed, rushing to her aid at the first call, comforting and supporting her when Veena faced difficulties, and genuinely rejoicing in her friend's successes. It seemed that having such a kind and loyal person by your side was a gift from fate and a great rarity. So why did it happen? Perhaps there was something they didn't know, some dark secret. These thoughts haunted them, and eventually, 3 years after the tragedy, he decided to visit Veena in prison. He was immediately warned that Veena was not in the best condition. She had contracted tuberculosis from one of her cellmates. The treatment was long and grueling. Eventually, the disease was brought under control, but the damage it had done to her body was irreversible. "She doesn't have long left. That's what our doctors say," a prison staff member told Jay. "I'm telling you this so you won't be too shocked when you see her. She's changed a lot." "And she agreed to talk to me right away?" Jay asked. When he applied for the visit, he was prepared for Veena to refuse to see him. After all, it was he who had put her behind bars. She must have hated him all these years. "Why wouldn't she agree?" the guard smirked. "It's not like anyone else visits her. No family, no friends, so any attention is better than none." The visit took place in a room resembling an ordinary living room. A soft sofa, 2 comfortable armchairs, a coffee table, even a flat-screen TV on the wall. Jay spent about 20 agonizing minutes in that room before Veena entered. The guard was right. She had changed a lot. If Jay had met her by chance on the street, he wouldn't have recognized her. Veena had always been pleasantly plump. Now she looked like a skeleton, her skin dry and wrinkled, an unhealthy yellowish hue. Her once lush bright red hair was now a sparse, dull grey. Veena seemed to have prepared for the visit. Her thin, tightly pressed lips were covered in cherry-red gloss. Cheap mascara clumped on her sparse eyelashes. At first, Jay almost felt sorry for her, but then he remembered what she had done. Veena smiled at Jay, revealing darkened teeth. She slowly approached the armchair and sat down across from her visitor. Jay looked at Veena and didn't know how to start the conversation. The words he had planned seemed to have vanished from his mind. He had prepared for this meeting, had questions and phrases ready, but Veena's appearance had thrown him off. "See what I've become?" Veena said sadly, a hint of a smile on her lips. She looked at Jay, without anger or resentment. He had expected her to lash out at him with accusations, but she didn't. Instead, she seemed to be seeking his approval, looking into his eyes pleadingly, trying to evoke sympathy. It was strange. "I know about your illness," Jay finally said. "They say I don't have long left." "Now do you understand how Sheila felt?" The words slipped from Jay's lips before he could think them through. Veena slowly shook her head, and a spark of malice lit up her sunken eyes, strangely animating her gaunt face. "Sheila." Veena spat out the name with so much hatred and disdain. "She ruined my whole life, tormented me since childhood, from the very beginning." "Do you know why I came to see you?" Jay asked. "It's not difficult to guess. I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. I even expected you much sooner. You want to know why I did it?" Jay briefly nodded. He was doing his best to hold back from saying anything hurtful to Vina. Countless times alone at home, he had shouted at her, shouted at the woman who couldn't hear him because she was far away, in prison, in another city. Jay had called her the worst names, and strangely, it had made him feel better. But now he couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. Vina had to talk. She had to explain herself. Perhaps she needed this too. "Tell me everything," Jay said calmly. "I want to know everything. Everything." "She always thought she was better than me," Vina began. "We were supposed to be friends, but Vina, she acted like I was second-rate. I was taken for granted. And as a child, I accepted it as normal. She was the successful princess and beauty, and I was just an afterthought." Vina was born into a family that was far from prosperous. Her parents worked, but they weren't exactly marginal. However, both loved to drink. In the evenings their apartment was filled with large noisy groups of people. Vodka flowed freely, and toasts were made one after another. These gatherings often ended in heated arguments and fights, or with guests and hosts passed out all over the apartment. Her parents seemed to love and care for her, but they always economized when it came to their daughter. Vina never had nice new dresses or school bags. She was given the cheapest school supplies, and there was never enough money for school materials. So in some subjects, no matter how hard Vina tried, she couldn't do well. Surprisingly, her parents always found money for their drinking parties with friends. Once Vina asked them directly why they could afford to entertain but not properly equip her for school. "We are working people," her father explained, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. "We earn money, we feed you. We need to relax somehow, to relieve stress. Otherwise, we'll just die in this life." "Everyone grows up like this," her mother retorted. "Don't make things up, and don't play the victim. You know how strictly our parents punished us for the slightest misdeed. We don't even lay a finger on you. As for money, times are tough now. All children grow up like this. No one is particularly pampered." But Vina knew that not all children grew up like this. She didn't have to look far for an example. Sheila, her best friend and neighbour, was proof enough. Sheila was raised solely by her mother, having never seen or known her father. They lived modestly, but the way Patricia treated Sheila was special. Despite her meagre salary, she managed to bring joy to her daughter. She saved money to buy Sheila nice clothes for school, paid for all her school trips, cooked delicious meals for her, and most importantly, was always interested in her daughter's life. She asked about her day, knew all about her relationships with her classmates, and was involved in her life. Sheila and Vina had been friends since they were very young. They met in the sandbox in their courtyard. 5-year-old Vina was already playing alone. Her mother assured the neighbours that this was to teach her daughter independence. Vina was even proud of this at first. Her peers were accompanied by their parents, but she was on her own. Later, as she grew older, she realised that it was simply her mother's laziness and indifference. Patricia watched over Sheila, but from a distance. Not interfering in her games and conversations with other children, she was simply there, making sure her daughter was safe. The girls became fast friends. Sheila was the first to approach the red-haired Vina and told her she looked like Pippi Longstocking from the cartoon. Vina was intrigued. She had never heard of this character, and Sheila eagerly told her exciting stories about the red-haired girl who seemed to attract adventures. It was captivating. From that day on, Vina and Sheila were inseparable. Patricia encouraged this friendship and always welcomed Vina into their home. Vina often visited Sheila and was amazed by her friend's room. It was beautifully arranged with a bookcase full of children's books, a large toy box, beautiful flowers in pots on the windowsill, a comfortable desk, and soft bed linens with princesses. Veena had never had anything like it. Yet Sheila's mother earned far less than Veena's parents. Patricia simply tried harder for her daughter. Sheila was the light of her life, her main priority. Veena's parents, on the other hand, saw their daughter as a useless appendage in their small family, an extra mouth to feed, even though they claimed to love their little girl. Patricia never shouted at or punished her daughter. Once, in front of Veena, Sheila dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor, and large drops of compote splattered the walls. Veena flinched, expecting a scandal. At home, she would have been in big trouble for something like that. But Patricia just smiled. "It's for good luck," she said, handing her daughter a rag. "Clean it up, but be careful, don't cut yourself." The mother watched Sheila carefully as she cleaned up, gently guiding her and giving her advice, but then praised her for her effort. Perhaps it was at that moment that Veena first felt envy toward her friend. She lives in her own room like a princess, and her mother never scolds her. Why do some have everything and others have nothing? Time passed, and it was time for the girls to start first grade. As luck would have it, the friends ended up at the same desk, much to their delight. Soon, however, it became clear that school was not easy for either of them. Before school started, Veena and Sheila had dreamed aloud about becoming the best students in their class, but in reality, they ended up somewhere in the middle. Veena was delighted that, at least in this regard, Sheila hadn't surpassed her, and she tried very hard, doing her homework, listening attentively to the teacher, even studying extra at home. All this was to become better than her friend in something. However, all these efforts bore no fruit. The girls' grades were roughly the same and quite mediocre. Then, one day, a gymnastics coach from a sports school came to the first graders' physical education class. She watched the children closely, looking for promising students. In the end, Sheila and a few other girls from their class were selected. The children were invited to a trial at the sports school. Veena cried bitterly when she got home. She had been rejected. Sheila was chosen, but not her. Once again she was left out. But Patricia noticed that Veena was very upset. She asked what was wrong, and Veena confessed that she also wanted to do gymnastics, but hadn't been chosen. Patricia hugged Veena and promised to sort it out. She felt sorry for her daughter's friend, perhaps understanding how hard it was for her with such parents. True to her word, Patricia spoke to the coach, and Veena was also accepted into the group as an exception. Veena was overjoyed. She had no intention of becoming a great gymnast. The important thing was that she now felt equal to Sheila, not inferior, but equal. After all, she too had been selected for the group. As the friends grew older, the gap between them became more apparent. Sheila was one of the best students in her year at the sports school. After a few years, Veena was advised to find another sport. Thanks to the tutors hired by Patricia, Sheila's grades improved, while Veena remained a struggling student. Sheila had beautiful, if inexpensive, outfits, while Veena wore clothes from second-hand shops. And so it was with everything. Sheila was more loved and respected in class, and boys admired her. Her life was more interesting and fulfilling than her best friend's. This angered Veena. Yes, she and Sheila were friends, and this friendship brought Vina many benefits. For example, Sheila let her copy homework and lent her clothes for discos. Patricia often invited Vina for lunch and fed her delicious pies, borscht and dumplings. She even sent Vina home with treats. One day, Vina realised that even these kindnesses and pity from Patricia humiliated her. The woman seemed to see that her daughter's friend was a pitiful creature and tried to comfort her out of kindness. Vina was angry with Sheila, despite the benefits she gained from their friendship. Sheila, however, noticed nothing. She considered Vina her most loyal and reliable friend, sharing her dreams and secrets with her. This openness and honesty also infuriated Vina. Sheila had a purity and freshness that Vina lacked. Vina appeared to be Sheila's loyal friend, but secretly she waited for something bad to happen to Sheila and rejoiced when it did. For instance, Sheila lacked just a few points to be admitted to the economics faculty. She was almost in tears when she shared this news with Vina. Vina comforted Sheila, trying to hide her joy. At least something didn't work out for that annoying Sheila, she thought. You see, Mum paid so much money for tutors, she really wanted me to become an economist. I feel bad for her, Sheila said. Yes, but what can you do? Sometimes things don't go as planned, Vina philosophised, trying to hide her satisfaction. But I didn't really want to go to that faculty myself. I dream of something else. I just feel bad for Mum. Vina maintained a sad expression and nodded sympathetically, but inside she was rejoicing. Serves you right, Sheila. Vina herself never even considered going to university, let alone such a prestigious faculty. She realistically assessed her abilities, but Sheila hadn't made it either. Vina was thrilled. After school, Vina enrolled in a culinary school, the only place her meagre grades could get her into. Her parents were pleased. It was a good, stable profession. But Vina already knew that she would never work in the food service industry. Such physically demanding work was not for her. She would find another way to make a living. Maybe she would marry well. Why not? Sheila, on the other hand, ended up in a great place, which again caused Vina pain. Her friend enrolled in a physical education school. She had always loved sports and was excellent at it. After graduating, she didn't go to work in a school, but found a job in a fitness club. Soon, she had a good income and a loyal clientele who couldn't praise the young trainer enough. Vina was again consumed with envy, even crying into her pillow at night over the injustice. By then, she hated her friend, yet she couldn't bring herself to end the relationship. Perhaps that would have brought her relief, but Vina continued to play the role of a devoted friend. Vina also found acceptable work for herself, learning to fill out marketplace cards for money. There were plenty of orders, but it was a dead-end job with no prospects. Besides, she couldn't stand Sheila's ever-increasing salary. Life once again showed each friend her place. Stagnation and a dead end for Vina, and an interesting job and development for Sheila. Again, it was unfair. All this only fueled Vina's hatred. She still hoped that she could arrange her life as well as her friend, or even better. The only option, as she saw it, was a fortunate marriage. She just needed to find a wealthy man, charm him, marry him, and a comfortable life would be assured. Sheila didn't even consider this option. She was passionate about her work and sought self-fulfillment. Vina, however, planned to take a different path, one that was more effective and, most importantly, quick. But nothing worked out. Vina tried hard, seeking relationships and attempting to attract young men from wealthy families. Often this meant compromising herself, adapting to others, and even humiliating herself. Yet there were no results, except for prolonged romances that never turned into serious relationships. Veena felt empty and disappointed after another failure when Sheila told her about Jay. This reignited Veena's hatred with new intensity. Jay was precisely the kind of man Veena dreamed of. From a wealthy family, educated, with a good job and bright prospects. And he truly loved Sheila. Veena saw how he looked at her friend with admiration and tenderness. No one had ever looked at Veena that way. It was painful and unfair. Veena made several attempts to charm and win Jay over, but she quickly realised it was futile. Then came another blow. Sheila and Jay got married. All of Veena's dreams seemed to come true to her despised friend. How could she bear it? Veena didn't immediately decide on her terrible act. At first, she tried for a long time to arrange her own life, albeit unsuccessfully. She failed to succeed in her career or relationships. Against this backdrop, Sheila's life seemed brilliant, like the foil on a bottle of expensive champagne, a dazzling career and a wealthy, handsome husband. Jay was not indifferent to Veena. He was the kind of man she dreamed of. It wasn't just about his money and prospects. His appearance, manner of speaking and smile, all of it resonated with Veena and gave her no peace. She wanted to be in Sheila's place when he hugged his wife or looked into her eyes. Veena decided to act when Sheila confided in her that she and Jay were thinking about having children. This was the final straw for Veena. She simply couldn't bear it. The plan wasn't spontaneous. Veena spent a long time searching the internet for the most suitable way to eliminate her rival. She needed to do it in a way that wouldn't implicate her, and she found the perfect solution: poison. Veena found people who could make it. Their services were expensive, but Veena spared no expense for her dream. From then on, everything was simple. Sheila trusted her friend. They often met and had lunch together. The symptoms didn't appear immediately, and Veena thought she had been deceived and that the poison wasn't working. But then Sheila began to complain of feeling unwell. Veena still couldn't believe that everything was going according to plan, but Sheila's condition worsened day by day. Eventually Sheila was bedridden, and Veena had no more doubts. She was always by Sheila's side, supporting her while slowly poisoning her. Now Veena felt stronger and more beautiful, while Sheila faded away. There was no trace left of her success. When Sheila passed away, Veena felt immense relief. Now, the person she could never catch up to was gone. There were, of course, other women more successful and beautiful than Veena, but they didn't bother her. They didn't touch the strings of her soul. Sheila was gone, and Jay was now free. Veena had a plan. She wanted to be Jay's support and comfort. She thought he would notice her during this difficult time, appreciate her, and they would be together. Without Sheila, everything should now fall into place for Veena. But something went wrong. There was an unexpected summons to the police, and charges were brought against her. Veena was terrified. She didn't want to end up behind bars, but she never regretted what she had done to Sheila. Now you know everything. Veena concluded her story. You sent your friend to her death, out of envy? Jay still couldn't believe it. Could envy really be such a powerful emotion? Exactly, Veena confirmed with a smile. There was a gleam of triumph in that smile. Jay suddenly felt uncomfortable and frightened. Before him sat a monster who had done this out of envy. Sheila had died because she was more successful than her friend. It was unimaginable. "I think it's time for me to go," Jay said calmly and stood up from the sofa. "Wait! No one has visited me in all these years. Let's talk a little more. I'm going to die soon." But the man left the room, closing the door behind him. He had much to think about. Jay wanted to share what he had learned with Sasha, to discuss this heavy story with her. But Patricia, he would never tell her. It would be too great a burden for her. Let her continue to think that Veena simply went mad. It was simpler that way.
Sarah arrived at the cafe 10 minutes earlier than the agreed time. The place was not particularly well furnished and not very clean, but it was close to Tina's workplace. Tina worked at a prestigious beauty salon and was a manicurist. 2 years ago, Sarah's close friend had recommended Tina, saying she was a genuinely pleasant girl who understood clients' wishes. And so it was. The women developed a warm, friendly relationship, sharing dreams, goals, life stories and advice. And, yesterday, Sarah got an unexpected call from Tina. Surprised, as she had no plans to visit the salon any time soon, she had no idea what could be the matter. "Hi, Sarah, it's Tina. I need to talk to you about something important. It won't take long, but it's critical." "Can we discuss it over the phone? At least give me a hint." "No, it's not a phone conversation. Can we meet during my lunch break tomorrow?" "Well, sure." "Great, then let's meet at noon. I have a gap in my schedule then. I'll wait for you at the cafe on the corner, where we usually get our coffee to go." So, under the faded artificial ivy, Tina waited for Sarah. "Have you been waiting long? I think I'm even a bit early." "No, just 10 minutes." Sarah smiled. "So, spill your secrets." Tina's gaze drifted somewhere behind the bar counter, and something in her expression told Sarah that the news was neither amusing nor trivial. A waiter approached, and they ordered double espressos. Tina seemed to force herself to perk up, adjusting her fluffy hair. "All right, no point in delaying. You remember I once told you that in our line of work we hear a lot of personal stuff from clients, and many of us become links in the gossip chain?" "Yes, Tina. I remember your principle of not gossiping about one client to another because you find it distasteful and to avoid trouble at work." "Exactly. Clients' lives are none of my business, and if it was someone else, I would have kept quiet. I'm not trying to be your friend, but we do have a good relationship, and I value that." "Tina, don't keep me in suspense," Sarah said with a smile. "I'm burning with curiosity." "So, 2 months ago, a new client started coming to me, a well-groomed blonde, around 28, dresses stylishly but a bit flashy. She often acts like a sweet, delicate creature, but I doubt she really is. Likes to assert herself by talking about the gifts her boyfriend gives her and their trips. She shows off her new things with enthusiasm and wants me to admire them too, and I do, it's part of my job. It makes the client happy, and they're more likely to come back to me. Anyway, everything is as usual. Then, the day before yesterday, my blonde client comes in, all tanned and beautiful. She tells me she just got back from some Mediterranean paradise, from Cyprus. She spent a week there with her boyfriend. Only a week because he's some busy businessman, as I understood. I congratulated her and commented on how good she looked. She immediately pulled out her phone and started showing me photos and telling me stories. Here they are eating tiny, tender squid stuffed with something. Here, he bought her a collectible ring from some famous jeweller. While I was doing her French manicure, she couldn't stop talking. She was in the mood to share personal details. It turns out her boyfriend is quite a bit older, recently turned 42. Of course he's married, but he hasn't loved his wife for a long time. He was just living out of habit until he met her, the blonde. His wife has always tried to boss him around and only thinks about herself. She's always busy with work and her daughter's studies. She instills the same beliefs in her daughter about the importance of finding one's calling, blah, blah, blah. But it's all just for show. His wife is a daddy's girl who has never had to struggle. First, her father took care of her, then her husband. With those advantages, anyone could find their way in life. But he had to make it on his own, starting from nothing, even from a disadvantage, with no help and only obstacles. That's an entirely different attitude towards life. He and his wife are totally different people. Heather, the blonde, understood that, even without him saying it, just by seeing his apartment. He had brought her home several times while his wife was away. According to him, the most important thing was to receive warmth from a woman. He would provide everything else himself. Heather said that he talked about his love so often, even when she didn't ask, that it was clear he truly loved her. In short, Sarah, I hear similar stories quite often. And then she decided to show me a photo of her beloved. "Tell me what you think, honestly," she said. I was prepared to give a restrained approval, to say that I understood her. And then I looked at the first photo and saw your husband, David. There they were, embracing in front of a seaside Italian restaurant. Then another photo of them together in front of a jewellery store window, and more, at the hotel bar and by the pool. On the sea at Aphrodite's beach. She showed me about 20 photos. She sighed and said, "You see, we're so happy together, there's no hiding it." Tina fell silent, took a breath, and added, "I think I did the right thing by telling you. I'm sorry I didn't do it right after Heather left. I was in a daze. I knew I should tell you, but I've never been in a situation like this before, where someone trusts me and I have to betray that trust. On the other hand, if someone is foolish enough to show everyone photos of her married lover, something like this was bound to happen eventually." "Tina, thank you. You did the right thing," Sarah quickly and quietly interrupted. "This isn't gossip, it's help. Thank you again for your help. This is not a situation where ignorance is bliss. I've always thought I could handle the truth. Your reputation at the salon won't suffer. You don't need to worry. I'm perfectly rational. All right. I have to go. You still have work and I'm going to a photo exhibition now. It's for work and I'll also have time to sort things out in my head. I'll probably call in a week to schedule a pedicure. I just need to figure out my own schedule first. Bye for now, dear, and thank you very much." "Bye. Make sure you call," was all the astonished and bewildered Tina could say. She couldn't even understand if it was a good thing that Sarah was so composed. Most of Tina's acquaintances would have found a bag of insults for their husband and his mistress and rushed to confront them immediately. And no one would have even thought about Tina's reputation. From their first meeting, Tina had sensed that Sarah was an interesting and good person. It was because of clients like her that she loved her job. Sarah's grandma Nina, if she were alive, would have said, "I told you so." And Sarah couldn't remember a time when Grandma Nina had predicted a positive outcome. All the bold endeavours of her relatives and acquaintances, both professional and personal, were doomed to fail according to Grandma's strict standards. As soon as something went wrong, Grandma would appear out of thin air with her "I told you so,"
Her reaction was often harder to bear than the incident itself, so everyone tried to hide their mistakes from her until the last moment. When Sarah decided to marry David, Grandma was particularly distressed. "Is this how it's supposed to be?" she would exclaim, pacing the floor of the large room. "You've read too many silly books about mesalliances and think a happy marriage can come from such a misunderstanding. I'm not saying you don't appeal to this David. Compared to the girls from their district, you're quite impressive, I'm sure. But he's truly in love with the opportunities this marriage opens up for him. Not every guy from the neighbourhood, as they say, is so lucky. He sees clearly that your father will help his son-in-law. You grew up in a sheltered environment and have no idea how people like him fight for their lives from childhood. It's written all over his face and forehead that he's just using you to climb higher." "Grandma, what's wrong with Dad helping David? David will work based on Dad's recommendation in his own field, which he studied at the university he got into on his own while working. Who cares about someone's background if they behave decently?" "All right. And when is your foolish wedding? We need to book a banquet hall in advance that won't be too cramped for the guests. A crowded venue ruins even the best organised banquet." "Grandma, we're just renting a small cafe. We decided to invite only our closest people." Grandma Nina's indignation reached new heights. "And what about our relatives? You're not inviting them? Weddings and funerals are occasions to gather the whole family. That's how it's done." "Grandma, we're just having a small, tasteful wedding with close friends." A month after the modest and elegant wedding with close friends, when Sarah and David returned from their honeymoon, Grandma Nina, as usual, had come to terms with all the glaring breaches of order and tradition. But contrary to Sarah's hopes, she disliked him faithfully and devotedly until the end of her days. "Grandma, you didn't live to see your triumph. I'd like to think you would have been more upset for me than happy about your foresight. And Mum didn't live to see it either. She would have sympathised, though there would have been a flood of tears." Sarah was on her third round of the exhibition, pausing at the photographs that helped her think. A conversation with David was inevitable. She had to endure it, just this once. But not in that apartment. She couldn't return there any time soon. She needed time for her disgust to subside. Tonight she would go to her father's and tell him everything, and then she would have to call her daughter Julia and tell her too. But it would be better to wait until Julia's exams were over. Just one more week. There are people who don't live out their own lives and won't let others live theirs either. They're the ones who came up with the idea that living for one's own pleasure is somehow shameful. But everyone wants it. It just doesn't work out for everyone. So that losers come up with nice excuses. But Heather wasn't like that. She wasn't going to obediently live like her mother, paycheck to paycheck, always saving, especially on herself. And to make her dreams come true, she chose a proven and easy way: generous men. Her boyfriend Lewis was a musician. He played the electric and acoustic guitar beautifully. In their small, sleepy town, where there were few opportunities to make a decent living, his earnings were considered good. He and his DJ friend Arnie were hired for family and corporate parties. As a result, Lewis always had enough money to live on, and his girlfriend Heather could always count on interesting weekends, gifts, and financial help in various situations. But then Arnie did start letting Lewis down more often. Going on binges when they could have been making money. Lewis was nervous and shared his thoughts with Heather. "Heather, I think we've hit a dead end here. At first everything was fine with Arnie, but now I need to move on. I can't make enough money alone without a DJ, and Arnie doesn't care about anything anymore. He just wants to drink. It's pointless to talk to him. He looks at me like I'm his enemy. I wouldn't aim for the capital right away, but a state capital would be perfect. I've saved some money for the first few months. It's enough to rent an apartment for 6 months and live while I look for something. Come with me." Heather wasn't sure if Lewis was serious, but she hurried to answer just in case. "Don't doubt it for a second. I'm sure my Lewis will succeed." Heather couldn't bear the thought of Lewis leaving alone. If he did, she would have to forget about him, and finding another guy like him in their town would be difficult. Thinking about the men who had shown even the slightest interest in her, Heather realized that none of them could offer such a beautiful relationship. They all had problems with money, and life just passed them by. Of course, there were owners of shops and small businesses in their town, but they were all family men with children, and the local gossips kept a close eye on their lives. Heather knew girls who had moved to big cities to study or work, but she wouldn't have dared to move far from home alone. Moving to a big city meant spending the first few years and half her salary on rent, scrimping on everything, and cooking dinner at night for the next day. Heather valued her comfort too much to sign up for all that. However, if she wasn't going alone, but with the caring Lewis, it might be a chance worth taking. And Lewis was serious. He had connected with someone who was looking for a guitarist to play at events. "So, Heather, are we going?" Lewis asked in a serious tone, demanding an immediate answer. "Yes, Lewis," Heather replied without hesitation. The chief accountant of the bus depot where she worked, upon receiving Heather's resignation, sneered and warned her that there was a line of candidates ready to take her place. And if things didn't work out in the big city, she wouldn't be taken back. Heather nodded and left for the new life in a big city. The euphoria of moving to a big city lasted only a few days. Heather quickly realized that things were not going as planned, and she had to accept it, at least for now. This city was changing Lewis rapidly. He was no longer the generous Lewis she knew and loved in their small town. He said that until he started making good money, they had to save. "Heather, my dear, this isn't forever. We just need to get established here. You see, we're paying for this one-bedroom apartment as if it were a penthouse. So, let's eat at home for now, okay? I don't need Michelin-starred restaurants. Simple fried potatoes with meat will do." "But you asked just 5 minutes ago if there were any responses to my resume," Heather reminded him. "Are you saying that after a day at the accounting office, I should also fry potatoes for you?" "Heather, me, you, what's the difference?" Lewis said, widening his honest eyes. "When I'm free in the evening, I'll cook. I won't dump all the housework on you. Don't worry. Once we make a little money, we'll go out to restaurants more often and treat you again." It soon became clear that the promised prosperity would take at least a couple of months. In reality, after 6 months, Heather could compile a long list of bitter warnings for inexperienced girls considering a similar move. She realized with dismay that her life was not improving. 5 days a week, she worked in the accounting department of a small manufacturing company and earned more than she did in her hometown. But the landlord raised the rent, and Lewis's earnings remained unstable. He had fallen out with the leader of the band he had come to join and was struggling to make it on his own, which filled Heather with quiet horror. They were growing increasingly distant. He was no longer tender and attentive, no longer cooed at her, and would stand at the stove frying potatoes or eggs with a sullen expression. Heather tried to have lunch at an inexpensive cafe in the business centre, where she worked, and skipped dinner to avoid cooking. She felt that something needed to change, but she had no idea how. She was used to relying more on luck than on herself. Fortunately, luck smiled on her soon enough. She finally met the man she had been eyeing for a while and managed to impress him with her gentle demeanour.
Her new hero worked in the same large business centre in the city centre as she did. He drove a not too new but decent car. He was probably in his 40s or a bit older, certainly not an ordinary manager. Those wore suits that subtly resembled neat uniforms, but this man dressed stylishly, with interesting accessories, and clearly spent money on his appearance. Noticing and appreciating him, Heather decided to have a try. She stopped getting coffee from the cheap cafe where she had had her business lunch and started frequenting the stylish cafe he visited. Soon, the pleasant stranger began to recognize the familiar beautiful face at the table by the column and would nod at her when he saw her in the cafe. Before long, he developed the habit of looking in the direction of that table as soon as he entered. To avoid getting her hopes up too soon, Heather decided to test her theory. She changed her usual spot and chose a different table in a dark corner. Her joy knew no bounds when she saw the man looking around in confusion, and when he spotted her, he couldn't hide his broad smile. So, he did remember her. Now, she couldn't wait to speed things up. Heather got along well with her boss, the chief accountant. They worked together in a tiny office, separate from the production area, which was more cost-effective for the owner. When there are only two of you, you inevitably get to know each other better. Heather was surprised to learn that the chief accountant, Bethany, was the same age as her mother, but looked much younger. She talked and thought about different things. Heather decided to show Bethany a photo of her mysterious stranger and ask if she knew who he was. "Yes, he's interesting," Bethany confirmed. "No, I don't know him. He's too young for me, and I don't get involved in such adventures. I prefer men my own age. But he's perfect for you. He's older, so you'll be young and beautiful to him, whereas men your own age take your beauty for granted. Why don't you ask the bartenders? They're nice guys and know a lot about their visitors." The next day, Heather decided to ask them. To her surprise, the bartender didn't smirk or react indifferently. Instead, he answered professionally. "He's a regular, been coming here since we opened. My favourite type of customer, never complains, always satisfied. He doesn't chat much with the staff, but we know him. His name is David. He works for a small firm that trades technical equipment and components with the Koreans. Their office is 1 floor below yours. He's the technical director and deputy general manager. That's all I can tell you. If you want my personal opinion—" "Yes, I'd like to hear it," Heather encouraged him. "He's a decent guy, calm, polite, and knows what he wants," the bartender said, with a hint of a smile. "So, he's smart," Heather laughed. David, who until recently had been a nameless stranger, was becoming more and more appealing to her. That evening, she thought about the most likely obstacle. He was probably married. She had no experience with married men, but she knew that if a man was calm, polite, and not poor, he was likely married by the time he reached his 40s. Even if he was divorced, it wouldn't be for long. "Just don't get involved with married men," her mother had warned her before she left, surprising Heather with her advice. At the time, Heather had smiled in confusion. She was leaving with Lewis, so why would her mother think that? Did she suspect that Heather and Lewis's paths would quickly diverge in the big city? Heather had thought her mother was narrow-minded, but it turned out she was quite perceptive. The next day, Heather caught a cold and spent 3 days in bed in her rented apartment. Fortunately, Lewis wasn't around. He was busy meeting new band members and trying to fit in. In the evenings, he would share his impressions with Heather, who struggled to feign interest. After all, she was sick and found it difficult to concentrate. When Heather returned to work, Bethany greeted her with a mysterious smile and shared some news. "I went to your favourite cafe on Friday to try their macchiato.
It really is delicious. As I was sipping my coffee at the counter, David walked in. He scanned the tables looking for someone interesting and then asked the bartender, "Does the girl who usually sits at that table by the column still come here?" I casually joined the conversation and said, "She has a slight cold. As her boss, I'm very sorry about that. Maybe if she knows you're concerned, she'll recover faster. By the way, her name is Heather." He gave me a restrained smile and said, "Yes, please tell her that her table neighbour is worried." "That's it, my dear," Bethany said, winking at Heather and handing her a stack of fresh invoices. Heather enjoyed reminiscing about the details of her first encounter with David. It seemed like they just needed a little push to meet each other, and Bethany's intervention provided that push. Everything suddenly became much simpler. When Heather was having her usual coffee, David walked into the cafe, smiled at her, and headed straight to her table. She had never had such an easy and smooth introduction to a man before. Everything fell into place from that very first day. Before she knew it, David declared that their relationship had become an important part of his life. As Bethany ironically remarked, the wheel of fate had begun to turn. It seemed like this was the rare chance Heather had been waiting for, and all she had to do was take a small risk. She didn't hesitate for long. After all, her relationship with Lewis had run its course, and returning home was not an option. It would be like admitting defeat, and her envious competitors would be all too happy to see her fail. Life back home would never be the same. She would always be second-rate. So Heather told Lewis that she was moving out. "Heather, I understand that you're tired," Lewis began. "I promised you a bright future, but things didn't turn out as planned. But I wasn't lying. I truly believed it. Please just calm down and wait a little longer. Things are finally starting to fall into place. Don't be so impatient. Please." "Are you even listening to me? Or are you just hearing yourself, as usual?" Heather asked wearily. "Who's being impatient here? I took the first decent job I could find, while you're still picky. In case you haven't noticed, I've been paying for this apartment with my salary for the past 2 months. If your career is finally taking off, then you have nothing to worry about. You can afford to pay for this place yourself. I found a cheaper apartment that suits me just fine." Lewis couldn't believe that Heather was serious about leaving. He was used to her not making decisions and relying on him. Living independently always made her uncomfortable. It hadn't even occurred to him that she might have found another man, and she didn't reveal her cards, simply packed her things into a suitcase, called a taxi, and left. David had rented her a small but cosy studio apartment, much nicer than the run-down place she had shared with Lewis. He assured her that the rent was reasonable because the owner was a good friend of his, and Heather wouldn't have to pay anything. David could easily afford it. What Heather found particularly appealing about David was his honesty. He told her right away that he was married, but that his feelings for his wife had long since faded. He lived with her out of habit, like many people do. Heather knew that all married lovers often said the same things, but she stubbornly believed that her case was special. After all, there were plenty of exceptional cases. She just needed to come up with a plan to push David to divorce his wife and marry her. It was a complex task, and she had to act carefully to avoid ruining everything. And then Lady Luck smiled on Heather once again. David's wife, Sarah, filed for divorce after discovering his infidelity. David was initially shocked and disoriented by the unexpected turn of events. Previously, he had insisted that obtaining a divorce from his wife would be extremely difficult. Heather had believed him, assuming that successful and established men were not easily let go. David had mentioned that their daughter Julia was studying in the capital and was still quite young and sensitive. He had said that they needed to wait a bit longer to avoid upsetting her. While Heather pondered how to persuade David to prioritise their relationship over his daughter's feelings, Sarah swiftly resolved the matter. She filed for divorce without considering Julia's emotions, and even moved out of their shared apartment immediately. It turned out that Sarah had a stubborn and principled character. "But it's for the best," David announced to Heather almost cheerfully. "Move in with me. We'll live together. Isn't that what you want?" "Of course, darling," Heather hastily assured him. "Why pay extra for my tiny place?" "We'll spend that money together," David agreed. Bethany advised Heather to constantly demonstrate her understanding and support to David. "Now is the perfect time to show him what he'll gain by marrying you. He shouldn't doubt that he needs this. My friend once waited 5 years for her married lover to divorce his wife. He finally did, but then he kept postponing their new marriage, making excuses. And then she found out he had married someone else, a much younger girl. He said marrying mistresses was bad form. So, if David invites you to live with him, agree. At least you'll see him more often and get to know his daily habits." In everyday life, David was not demanding and had an even temperament, unlike Lewis, who justified his moody outbursts by claiming he was a creative person. Heather silently congratulated herself. She was doing everything right. A more understanding, tender and cheerful partner than her would be difficult to find. She even offered to accompany David to the divorce hearing. "I can see you're nervous, David. There's nothing shameful about it. Anyone in your situation would be nervous. If I go with you, it will guarantee that your ex won't try to pull any stunts. She won't want to show her true feelings in front of me. I know women like her. Just trust me." David did not object, and they went to court together. Sarah turned out to be exactly as Heather had imagined from the photos, a slim brunette with a cool smile. She had nothing striking about her, not even bothering with a proper hairstyle or manicure, yet she carried herself like a queen. She walked past David and Heather with a lazy gait, smiled enigmatically, and casually waved the thin folder of documents she was carrying. Someone must have joked that she had a Mona Lisa smile, and she believed it. Overall, she seemed too self-assured. The courtroom, which smelled heavily of dust from the thick curtains and massive cabinets, contained only the judge, the secretary, David, Heather and Sarah, who was about to become David's ex-wife. Heather barely listened to the judge's words, finding the legal terminology confusing. She understood only that the parties did not wish to reconcile. The judge's monotonous phrases nearly put her to sleep when suddenly she felt as if a blanket had been ripped off her. "Mrs. Scram, can you provide the court with documents proving that the apartment in question should remain solely in your possession after the divorce?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honour," Sarah replied, rising from her seat and calmly handing the folder to the judge. The moments between the judge taking the documents and speaking again felt like an eternity to Heather. She glanced at David and noticed he had paled beneath his tan. He seemed to shrink, no longer resembling the respectable man she had fallen for and left Lewis for. Heather felt a wave of confusion and anxiety. "Yes, the apartment was indeed bequeathed to you by your late mother before your marriage," the judge confirmed. "Mrs. Scram, did your husband contribute financially to improving the living conditions, such as paying for renovations?" David opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah answered first. "No, Your Honour. The apartment has been renovated twice and even had a legally approved redesign, but my father paid for these expenses. He is a meticulous man and probably still has the receipts. The brigade of workers he hired can also confirm who paid them." "Thank you, Mrs. Scram," the judge said, then turned to David. "Mr. Scram, as far as the court is aware, the apartment where you lived with your spouse is not your only residence." "No, Your Honour," David admitted grimly. I did not contribute financially to the renovation of my wife's apartment because I was saving money to buy my own property. I did not want to feel like a kept man because my wife comes from a wealthy family. 5 years ago I purchased a studio apartment." "Is that the same studio you supposedly rented for me?" Heather wanted to interrupt, but she held her tongue, knowing they were in court. It seemed like David was not the provider and protector in this family. Sarah's father was. Sarah herself did not appear helpless at all. "You're such a fool, Heather," she thought to herself. No wonder Sarah filed for divorce so readily. Any woman in her position would have done the same when there's nothing to lose but a cheating husband who lies to impress girls. What did David expect from their relationship? That she would accept his mediocrity and continue to love him as he was? He's just another Lewis, honestly. Heather's head was spinning with questions, and she could no longer pretend to be a loving kitten. But she couldn't cause a scene in the courtroom, especially not in front of Sarah. "I need to go," she whispered to David, standing up and grabbing her bag. She quietly walked along the wall towards the exit. Before she knew it, she was outside, feeling the intense heat. She longed for cold water, not just to drink, but to pour over her head to cool down. Heather stood in the middle of the sidewalk for a couple more minutes, then quickly, almost running, she hurried away from the courthouse building. Meanwhile, Sarah feared that she might feel sorry for her husband's mistress. She didn't consider all wives to be saints and all mistresses to be shameless. Life wasn't that simple. Tina had painted a portrait of a girl who could be pitied. The girl had gone hunting, thinking that she had caught a bird by the tail, only to find a plucked goose in her hands. Her father, upon learning of the impending divorce, immediately asked, "You won't change your mind, will you? I've often seen women forgive their husbands for such adventures over time, and family life really improves." "No, Dad." Sarah sadly smiled. "You're not original in your opinion. It's just that not all adventures are the same. For David, this wasn't a momentary lapse of judgment or a closed loop where he loved both his family and another woman. He lived with me out of convenience. He found it convenient to have this relatively stress-free, well-paying job with you, this apartment, and the opportunity to relax. He's not stupid and understands perfectly well that he skipped a few hard steps by becoming my husband. He could have at least kept quiet about me when he was with her, out of basic human decency, but he told her every day how much of a bossy, cold, domineering ice queen I was. He could have at least lied and said something closer to the truth." "Yes, indeed, that's nonsense," her father agreed, raising his grey eyebrows and hurriedly hugging his Sarah. Mr. Harriman had already said goodbye to David the very next day after Sarah filed for divorce, and his joy was boundless. Finally, he had a good reason to get rid of this careless son-in-law, whom he kept around only out of love for his daughter. David tried to maintain his composure but failed. "I understand your feelings, Mr. Harriman," he said pompously but unconvincingly, "but I am sure that you are an objective person and do not mix personal matters with work. If my new employer needs references from my previous job, can you provide them?" "Unfortunately, Mr. Scram," Mr. Harriman said softly, "I have mixed business with personal matters so much that I am disgusted with myself. If I had hired you from a job advertisement all those years ago, we would have worked together for a maximum of 6 months and parted ways. Of course, I won't ruin your resume. Write whatever you want in it, but I won't recommend you to anyone. I could, of course, advise competitors to hire you for a key position, but they would consider it mockery, and I still stand for civilized business." Mr. Harriman enjoyed watching David desperately try to hide his irritation and confusion. He didn't consider himself a vindictive person,
but he wasn't ashamed of his satisfaction. Heather packed her things into a suitcase and gloomily scolded herself. That's why she was so unlucky, why she always ended up with the wrong men. She needed to clarify everything thoroughly from the start, not rely on luck. But the main thing now was to pack all her belongings, including gifts, and slip out of the apartment before David returned. Heather suddenly shuddered. She had been so preoccupied with her clothes that she hadn't noticed the key turning in the lock. She managed to assume a casual pose and froze in it. Sarah stood in the doorway. David was coming from the trial, so exhausted that he even remembered the long-forgotten hard work in his parents' vegetable garden. Yes, he came from the most ordinary family, where they grew food in the garden, as if that would surprise anyone. And Heather herself was just like that. Even though she pretended to be a carefree, glamorous girl, they were very similar, which was why they got along so well. The main thing now was to convince Heather of this. Losing the remnants of a comfortable life and his mistress in one day would be too much. David needed to find the words to calm her down and convince her to stay with him. It wouldn't be that hard. She had nowhere to go tonight anyway. Finding suitable rental housing in a few hours was impossible. David had been sure that he would quickly find a suitable job by the scheduled date of the divorce proceedings. It didn't work out. What he was offered for his usual money required 25 hours a day, and his usual volume of work was paid very modestly. David needed Heather now more than ever to keep from falling into despair. When he found a decent job, he would figure out what to do next. The door to the apartment appeared to be closed, but not locked. What a careless girl, the man thought, so relaxed that she even forgot to lock the door. Come in, whoever you want, take whatever you want. And there was still a lot of his things here that needed to be taken out before Sarah arrived. Well, at least Heather hadn't thought of disappearing. Suddenly, giggling and women's voices came from the kitchen. Forgetting that he was going to take off his shoes, David stood in the kitchen doorway. The dining table was laden with vases of strawberries, candied fruit and cakes. There was also a bottle of champagne. Seated comfortably at the table like old acquaintances were Heather and Sarah. "Hello," they said almost simultaneously, with indifference and without any malice, as they saw David in the doorway, and they clinked glasses, exchanging glances. "Celebrating, I see," was all David could think to say. "Why not?" Sarah replied calmly. "We're celebrating the day of getting rid of unnecessary baggage." "And I'm the baggage, of course. Fine, I get it. A scorned woman's revenge, I understand. But you, Heather, what do you have to do with this celebration? Remember, I told you that my ex-wife is a master at using people for her own purposes. So you're greatly mistaken if you think she sympathizes with you. She lacks this ability." "I see how much it doesn't bother you," Sarah replied almost amiably. "Heather, let's go pack your things." David switched to a business-like tone, instantly deciding it was wiser to ignore Sarah. But Heather had no intention of moving. Instead, she settled more comfortably, took the largest strawberry from the bowl and announced, widening her eyes, "I'm curious, on what grounds are you giving me orders? You never officially proposed to me. An invitation to live together is not a proposal. And after your lies, I consider myself a free woman. I've already packed my things. I'm just chatting with the apartment's owner. We're having a nice time, understanding each other, and you can go about your business. I have no claims against you." Looking intently at David, Heather comically wrinkled her nose, as she did when she saw a spider or a frog. "Playing someone else's role?" David sneered. "Your usual cooing suited you better. At least there was some use for you in it.
Gifts, travels. So you're mistaken, Heather. You shouldn't confuse yourself with Sarah. You can't afford to act this way because she's her rich daddy's girl. She's brave because she'll never stay without her father's support. But you're the ex-girlfriend of a street musician who will soon go back to your village to count wages for workers in a logging company. Do you think I would marry you? Who marries someone like you? You only dream of taking as much as you can get at a man's expense. You use men, and when you use them, you play the innocent victim. If anyone has the right to accuse me of lying, it's certainly not you. Even your guitarist won't take you back now. He's probably already found someone simpler, without glamorous pretensions.
We've heard enough of your performance, Sarah interrupted calmly but loudly. Keep your composure and pack your things, please. Sarah spoke to David as if he were a rude teenager, while Heather sat silently, enjoying her strawberry with obvious relish, not looking offended at all, despite everything that had been said. David imagined how humiliating it would be to rummage through the closets, pulling out his pants and shirts, to the giggles from the kitchen, and simply left the apartment, loudly throwing the keys on the floor and slamming the door. A grown man, Sarah huffed, and caused such a drama. I'm sorry if my idea upset you. I didn't expect him to act like that. I still thought better of him, it turns out. I'm not surprised at all, Heather declared. Men like him treat any of us without respect. No, I'm no saint. He's right about the calculator in me, but he pretended to be respectable just to keep me. I never lied to him. I honestly told him who I am, where I'm from, what situation I'm in, and that I need support and patronage, not paradise. He knew all this, and now he's offended for some reason. Heather shrugged, trying to match Sarah's composure. Let me settle with you right away, for the favour, Sarah remembered. Thank you. Not everyone would have stayed until he arrived and pretended to have fun. But I would add that not everyone would have suggested it, Heather replied, taking the neatly placed bills from the table. When I saw you in the doorway, I expected a scandal and was ready to defend myself with suitcases. You should hate me. You have every right to. I'm sure David told you I'm a terrible egoist. Sarah laughed. It's true, I love myself, so I'd be sorry to waste my energy on hatred. I'm even grateful to you for appearing in time. I would have kept living, wasting my life on this David, and not knowing what kind of person he is. He's not just a cheater, he's malicious and petty. I agree, Heather confirmed with pleasure. Audrey looked up at the sky and sighed. She had stepped outside just 10 minutes ago, and at that time there wasn't a single cloud in the sky, but now the first drops of rain had started to fall. The air was filled with a scent of dampness. She didn't need to be a weather forecaster to guess that her light summer dress would be soaked in a matter of minutes. Immediately she wanted to go back home, but she couldn't. Soon Addie and Tracy would wake up and want to eat, and as the eldest, Audrey had to look after them, including finding food. Well, there's not much left, Audrey muttered to herself and quickened her pace. She had almost reached the large backyard, almost filled with rows of tall garbage bins. Audrey had discovered this place quite accidentally. Once a week, there was a display of food, almost with end-of-life expiration dates, and anyone could pick it up. She just had to be quick. First, many homeless people knew about it, and secondly, a truck was going to come in an hour to pick up what was left for disposal. This time Audrey made it. She quickly threw an old, worn-out backpack off her shoulder. Its straps had been sewn countless times. She had sewn them herself, so she knew that the backpack could hold at least 10 kilograms without tearing. Today's haul was good. 2 packs of cottage cheese with sour cream. Tracy loves them. A pack of chicken thighs,
a pack of peaches in syrup, a can of condensed milk, and a large pack of tomato juice. When the haul was stuffed into the backpack, which would be quite heavy to carry, Audrey headed back. If she hurried, she could make it home before the rain started in earnest. Suddenly, something in one of the bins caught her attention. Audrey came up and pulled out a strange wallet. It was bright green, like spring grass, and had a bright pink flower stuck to the front, with petals made of braided threads. "Well, well," Audrey said and opened it. Inside were several $100 bills. Audrey gasped. They could live on this for a month. Besides the money, the wallet contained only a small old coin. Who could have lost such a strange wallet? Audrey looked around, hid the wallet in her inner pocket of her backpack, put the backpack on her shoulder, and headed towards home. The place where they all lived couldn't really be called a home. They called it that more out of habit, and perhaps to maintain the illusion that they actually had a home. In fact, it was part of an old district of the city, an old district. There stood several wooden houses where there used to be a stove heating system. About 15 years ago, these houses were deemed unfit for habitation. The residents were resettled and the huts were supposed to be demolished to build a new high-rise residential complex in their place. But during the analysis of the area, it became clear that the conditions were entirely unsuitable, making the construction of new houses unjustifiably expensive. Thus, the old houses were left undisturbed. Besides Audrey, Addie and Tracy, a few other homeless individuals also resided there. Electricity in the uninhabited district had long been cut off, leaving only stoves for warmth. Fuel came from nearby trees or dilapidated houses that were no longer fit for living. Some people had been residing there for over a decade. Audrey discovered this place about a year ago. Before that, they had taken refuge in basements, shelters, and other places unsuitable for small children. Audrey was now 21 years old. Addie was 12, and Tracy was only 9. The younger ones were siblings, while Audrey was not related to them, but she loved and cared for them as if they were her own. Audrey herself had grown up in an orphanage. She had no memories of her parents, and the caretakers never told her how she ended up there, or if she had any other relatives. Audrey had no fond memories of the orphanage, and when she turned 16 she ran away and began living on the streets. Life would have been very difficult for her if she had not met Henry. This old man noticed her, freezing at the train station, where she had been staying for nearly a week with barely any food. Henry took her in, and from then on they travelled together, rarely staying in one place for more than a few weeks. Audrey enjoyed this nomadic life. Henry seemed to know every city they visited. When Audrey asked how he became homeless, he would simply shrug. "That's just how life turned out, dear," he would say. Henry believed that life, fate or the universe, knew better than people. "Pay attention to the signs," he taught Audrey. "They are everywhere. If you listen to your intuition, you will never be lost." He claimed that this was how he met Audrey. "I was planning to go to a different station that day, but then something told me to go to this station instead. That's how we met." Initially, Audrey was sceptical of Henry's words. She thought that signs, astrology and fortune-tellers were all deceits. Yet Henry's intuition never seemed to fail him. Once, for instance, he woke Audrey in the middle of the night and said they had to leave. "Where to, Henry?" Audrey protested sleepily. "Let's sleep several more hours and then go." But the old man sighed and shook his head firmly. "We have to go, Audrey. I sense trouble coming." There were several such incidents. Each time, Audrey would sigh but get up. A day or two later, they would hear through the grapevine that a brawl had broken out in the shelter they had left, or the police had raided it, or a fire had occurred. "How do you do it?" Audrey asked her companion. "What's your secret?" The old man would just shrug. "There's no special secret, and I don't have any magical intuition. I think everyone has this feeling. Most people just suppress it, but I prefer to listen to it."
Audrey lived with Henry for 3 whole years. Then the old man caught a cold, fell ill and passed away. Audrey cried for a long time, and then she wiped away her tears, gathered her belongings, and moved on, guided by her inner intuition. Less than a week later, she met Addie and Tracy. Their fate was similar to hers. The siblings had ended up in an orphanage when Tracy was barely a year old and Addie was 4. They always tried to stay together, with Addie taking care of her sister. But a few years later, when Addie was 11 and Tracy was 8, a family wanted to adopt Tracy alone, without her brother. That's when they ran away. "I was aware that they would take her in," Addie later told Audrey. "I wanted her to have a better life, but Tracy cried all day. She said if they took her away alone, she would run away and look for me. I couldn't put her in such danger. Together we could at least protect each other. I would keep her safe." It's uncertain how long the children could have survived on the streets alone, or what dangers they might have faced if they hadn't met Audrey. She decided it was fate and took them under her wing, just as Henry had once done for her. Soon they found this abandoned neighbourhood. They chose a small, unassuming but sturdy house and made it their home. From Henry, Audrey had learned to light the stove and cook. She taught Addie and Tracy everything she knew. They mainly took care of the household, while Audrey was responsible for finding food and clothing. Deep down, Audrey believed that this situation was temporary. She held on to the hope that better days were ahead, trusting her intuition, as Henry had taught her. Now she had found this strange wallet. After feeding the children, Audrey retreated to her corner of the house. Their small home was divided into personal spaces, using old sheets hung from nails in the ceiling. "We have a 4-room apartment," Addie had joked. 3 bedrooms and a living room." "Yes," Audrey had replied. "Too bad the bathroom is outside." Audrey climbed onto her bed and drew the makeshift curtains. She was determined to find the wallet's owner, though she wasn't sure how. The money inside would have been enough for them to live on for almost a month, but she remembered Henry's words. "Not all benefits are obvious. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to gain more than you initially see." Audrey sighed and examined the wallet again. This time she noticed a small, almost hidden pocket inside. She opened it and found a small business card. On the expensive, thick black card, golden letters spelled out an address. Audrey didn't know where the street was, but she guessed that this address could lead her to the wallet's owner. The next day, Audrey spent a long time searching for the right street. Finally, she realised that the house she needed was in a different part of the city, a wealthy district with large private homes. Luck was on her side that day. She slipped past the security guard, stepped over the lowered barrier, and walked along the long, deserted streets. It was almost noon, and the heat was becoming unbearable, which might explain the lack of people. When Audrey reached the house, she paused, unsure of what to do next. A high metal fence hid the house from view, and the gate was closed. She spotted a doorbell and, after a moment's hesitation, pressed it. Almost a minute passed before a stern, dry voice came through the intercom. "Who is that?" Audrey took a deep breath and replied, "I found your wallet." "What wallet?" "A green glossy one with a bright knitted flower. There was an old coin inside." There was a heavy sigh from the intercom. "Come in," the man said. There was a beep and the gate clicked open slightly. Audrey stepped inside. Behind the fence stood a modern house, not overly large but clearly new. A man stood on the porch, frowning at Audrey. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with light auburn hair and a beard, both streaked with grey. His blue eyes watched her from behind thin metal-framed glasses. Despite the heat, he wore a plaid shirt and dark blue jeans. "Where did you find it?" the man asked. "In a dumpster behind the store," Audrey replied. "And what were you doing in a dumpster?" Audrey blushed. The man nodded as if the answer was obvious. Audrey suddenly became acutely aware of her worn-out sneakers, faded dress and patched backpack. She silently handed him the wallet. He took it, opened it, and grunted.
"Did you ever consider," he continued, "that if someone throws away a wallet full of money, they might not want it back?"
Audrey raised her eyebrows in surprise. "So you threw it away on purpose?" He nodded. "But why?"
He frowned. "The real question is, why did you return it? Especially with the money. It's clear you need it more than I do. Even if you're sentimental, you could have returned the wallet and said there was no money in it."
"At first I wanted to do just that, but then I felt it would be right to return it to its owner. I believe in doing what feels right." The man sighed and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This simple gesture made him seem less stern.
"Well, well," he said, "another believer in fate. Come inside, then."
He gestured invitingly, and Audrey, after a moment's hesitation, followed him. Inside, everything was made of wood, cosy and clean.
"What's your name?"
the man suddenly asked. "Audrey."
"And I'm Colin Hartman. Nice to meet you. By any chance, do you need a job?"
Audrey tensed and blushed. "I'm not that kind of person. I need money, but not enough to do anything dishonest." The man sighed and rolled his eyes.
"You're not my type. Are you even 18? I need a housekeeper. My previous one just quit, and it's difficult to find a good replacement."
Audrey eyed him suspiciously. "And you'll just hire me off the street?"
"You're smart. You found me, after all, and you're honest. Since you decided to return what you could have kept, also determined, since you made it here, and besides, I believe in fate. If this wallet came back to me through you, there must be a reason."
Audrey pondered. Despite his apparent sternness, she sensed no danger from Mr. Hartman. Over the years of living on the streets, she had learned to recognize people to avoid. He was not one of them. "What will I have to do?" Audrey asked.
"Nothing complicated. Cook my meals, clean the house, go shopping. Every weekday."
Audrey thought about it. She needed the work. Tracy and Addie were old enough to manage during the day without her. And in the future? Who knows? Maybe she could save enough money to rent a proper place for the three of them. "I agree," Audrey said.
"Then it's a deal."
Audrey cautiously shook his outstretched hand. The homeowner took all the money from the wallet and handed it to Audrey.
"This is an advance. Buy yourself some decent clothes and shoes. If security stops you, tell them to call me. I'll confirm everything. I expect you tomorrow at 8 in the morning. Understood?"
Audrey nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'll be there," she murmured. "I just still can't believe this is happening. Thank you."
"Don't thank me yet. Just don't be late, Audrey."
Audrey didn't spend all the money from her new employer right away. Who knows how things might turn out? Of course, she bought food for the children. Grains, pasta, canned meat, sausages, tea, milk, a pack of cookies and a bag of candy. Without a refrigerator or electricity, they stored perishables in the basement. Audrey also finally updated their wardrobes, finding 3 decent pairs of sneakers at a second-hand store. She bought Addie jeans, shorts and a couple of t-shirts, and several dresses for Tracy. "You'll be okay without me, right?" she asked the children that evening as they tried on their new clothes.
"Of course," Addie replied indignantly. "We're grown-ups."
"Maybe, if you have a job, you can adopt us," Tracy asked dreamily. Though the youngest, she often thought about adult matters, more than Audrey and Addie combined.
"Yeah, right," Addie scoffed. "Audrey is only 21 and we don't have a place to live. Besides, I doubt a housekeeper earns enough to support 3 people.
Audrey sighed. "I'll probably be working off the books," she said. "I don't have any documents." Tracy's face fell.
Noticing this, her brother quickly put a hand on her shoulder. "Everything will be fine," he said firmly. Audrey smiled and said, "Just in case, I'll write down the address and draw a map of how to get there, and I'll leave some money." The next morning the guard noticed her. "Who are you here to see, young lady?" he asked sternly. Audrey stopped. What if Mr. Hartman was just playing a joke on her, and she was about to be thrown out in disgrace? "Who are you here to see, young lady?" the man repeated loudly, with irritation in his voice. "I'm here to see Mr. Hartman," Audrey replied. "Ah, then go ahead, he warned me," the guard said. Audrey nodded and hurried inside. As soon as she pressed the familiar doorbell button, the gate opened almost immediately, as if they had been waiting for her. Audrey took a deep breath and entered. "Well, you're not late," Colin said approvingly. "Have you had breakfast?" Audrey nodded uncertainly. She had left the house early, and the stove, their only means of cooking, hadn't been lit yet. "I see," the homeowner sighed. "Let's go to the kitchen and I'll show you everything." There, they quickly figured out how to use the cooker, microwave, and other appliances. Although Audrey had seldom used any of these before, she quickly understood how everything worked. Within half an hour, 2 large mugs of steaming coffee, 2 plates of fluffy omelette, and several crispy cheese and bacon toasts were on the table. "Well, now that we've eaten, we can get to work," the homeowner said cheerfully. He gave Audrey a brief tour, showing her the rooms and explaining what needed to be done in each. "A good cleaning wouldn't hurt," he concluded cheerfully. "I've been without help for a while. The only thing you shouldn't touch is my desk. I'll take care of that myself. I'll be working in the garden. If you have any questions, find me there." He took his laptop and left. Audrey tied her hair back in a bun and gathered all the necessary cleaning supplies from the closet under the stairs. She had never cleaned such a house before. Her own place could barely be called a home. She and the kids would mop the floors, sweep, and sometimes wash the windows, all without any cleaning products, just old rags and a bit of baking soda. Audrey had great respect for baking soda. It could clean almost anything. She had also worked as a cleaner a few times, usually in technical rooms or cafeterias. Once she worked in a roadside cafe for almost 2 weeks, but the owner started harassing her. Audrey told Henry about it that same evening. He frowned and said she wouldn't go back there. The next morning they packed their things and left for another city. A few years later, when Audrey returned to that city alone, she learned that the cafe had burned down in a fire. It happened the very night after she and Henry left the city. Cleaning turned out to be not as difficult as she thought. It was clear that Mr. Hartman lived alone, and apart from dust, there was no other dirt in the house. However, in his office, there were framed photos on the walls. One of them caught Audrey's attention. Mr. Hartman had his arm around an attractive blonde woman with grey eyes, and in front of them stood a girl of about 10. That must be his wife and daughter, Audrey thought, and naturally she wondered where Mr. Hartman's wife and daughter were now. Maybe they lived in the city, or were they away on vacation? Audrey didn't touch the desk, but glanced at it and saw a pile of crossed-out documents with notes in red pencil in the margins. She couldn't help but look, and realised it seemed to be a script for a movie or TV show. "Are you a screenwriter?" Audrey asked her boss when she went into the garden to call him for lunch. He looked up at her absently, and his eyes behind his glasses flashed with annoyance. "You're a curious one, Audrey," the homeowner noted, without much irritation. "No, I'm not a screenwriter." Audrey nodded, waiting for him to continue. Colin, realising he would have to answer the question after all, sighed. "I used to be. Now I'm more of a teacher, mentor, call it what you will. I review the work of young screenwriters, point out mistakes, highlight successful moments, rewrite unsuccessful scenes and endings. That sort of thing."
Your job sounds interesting, Audrey said thoughtfully.
Well, it only seems that way, Colin said thoughtfully. Sometimes it drives me crazy. But you'd better tell me if we're going to have lunch.
Audrey immediately replied, Of course, that's why I came to get you. When they entered the house, the homeowner looked around in surprise.
Wow, he said. Audrey, have you ever worked as a maid before?
No, the young woman replied. Cleaning isn't as hard as reviewing a script. It doesn't require any special skills or experience.
Colin burst out laughing.
Audrey returned home late that evening. The bus ride took an hour. Fortunately, the children were fine. Well, how did it go? Tracy asked as soon as Audrey walked in. Everything's fine, Audrey smiled. I think I found a real, normal job. Hooray! Tracy exclaimed, throwing her arms around Audrey's neck. Audrey laughed and kissed the girl on the cheek.
I knew everything would be fine,
Addie said. And how are things with you? The children exchanged glances and shrugged. Boring, Tracy concluded. All we do is eat and sleep, all day, and play a little. Audrey sighed. You should be going to school. It's summer now, Addie reasonably pointed out, and in the fall you won't be able to enroll us just like that. I know, Audrey replied, but I'll think of something. I don't want you to live like this forever. Over the next week, they adjusted to their new routine. Audrey gradually got used to going to bed early and waking up early. She spent less time with the children, but they didn't mind and found ways to keep themselves occupied. As for Colin, he praised her cooking and cleaning, and sometimes, when he was in a good mood, he would share stories about his work.
By the way, where do you live?
He asked her one day. Audrey was taking dishes out of the dishwasher at the time. Her hand trembled, but she managed to hold on to the cup at the last moment. It was Mr. Hartman's favourite cup, and she definitely shouldn't drop it.
Audrey, her employer warned, be honest. We agreed on that.
Audrey wrinkled her nose. That's a personal question. If you want to ask me personal questions, then I'll ask you personal questions too.
Colin's light auburn eyebrows shot up. Aren't you getting bold after a week of work?
He noted, but then he softened.
All right, fair enough. Tit for tat.
We live in an abandoned house, in the wooden district across the river.
Is that the one they wanted to demolish, but found the soil unsuitable for high-rises?
Audrey nodded.
I see. And you say, we. Who else lives with you? A husband? Boyfriend?
Audrey didn't want to discuss the children, but it was too late to back out now. I live with 2 kids, Addie and Tracy. They're orphans too. They're like family to me.
Got it. How old are they?
9 and 12. Colin's face suddenly became thoughtful. Audrey immediately regretted telling him this and decided to distract him. Why don't your wife and daughter visit you? She asked abruptly. The wallet belongs to your daughter, right? Her boss frowned. Deflecting attention, he said thoughtfully,
Good move. You're not as simple as you seem, my dear.
You said I could ask you personal questions too, she countered.
All right, clever girl, you win this round.
Colin sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose.
My wife and I are divorced, you guessed, right? But Jenny wasn't my daughter. She was my stepdaughter. I married her mother when I was 20, and Norma was 25. Jenny was 7 at the time. I loved Jenny like my own daughter, and you're right about the wallet too. She brought it for me at a flea market with her pocket money and gave it to me for my birthday. She put a coin in it for good luck and asked me to always keep the wallet with me.
Colin sighed.
I carried it with me all those years until her death.
Audrey felt a chill run down her spine. Whose death? She asked hoarsely. The man stared blankly into space.
Jenny's death. She had just turned 18 and finished school. Norma and I saw her off to her prom. And the next morning we found out she had gone for a drive with her classmates. The driver was a boy who had been drinking. The car skidded, spun around and hit a barrier. There were 2 girls and a boy in the back seat. They were injured but survived. The driver and Jenny, who was in the front seat, died instantly.
He fell silent. Audrey didn't know what to say or do. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Colin nodded.
Norma and I took it hard. The worst part was that we each grieved alone. I didn't even notice how my wife and I became strangers to each other.
"And you got divorced?"
"Yes, 2 years ago."
"I'm so sorry." The man nodded again.
The only reason I didn't go crazy was because I worked all the time, and I kept the wallet Jenny gave me. Then one day I decided it was time to let go of the past. I put money in the wallet to make sure it wouldn't come back. But then you showed up.
"But if you did not want the purse to be returned to you, why did you put the card with the address in the pocket?" Audrey asked.
"It wasn't me. Jenny must have put it there when she gave it back to me. But then I used to lose everything. But I kept her wallet all those years."
Audrey shrugged. "Then let's call it fate."
"Yeah, I don't have any other explanation."
Suddenly her boss narrowed his eyes slyly.
"Now that you know more than enough about me, I want to hear your story. How did you, such a young, smart, beautiful and honest creature, end up living like this? Where are your parents, siblings, husband and everyone else?"
"I don't know," Audrey answered honestly. "I was very young when I was sent to the orphanage. I don't remember my parents, and the caretakers never told me anything. I ran away when I was 16 and have been wandering ever since. I have no one but Addie and Tracy."
"And you've never thought about what you'll do next? While you're young and healthy, you can run around, live in abandoned houses and eat from dumpsters. But what about the future?"
Audrey blushed and glanced at the clock. "If we're done for today, Mr. Hartman, I'll go." On the way home, she thought about her employer's words. Of course, Audrey herself knew that her current life was far from ideal, but it always seemed to her that any moment now everything would change. Yet after speaking with Mr. Hartman, she suddenly realized that if she didn't change something right now, she would remain a filthy vagabond for the rest of her life. As she approached the house, she saw that it was quiet and dark. Usually they would light a candle visible through the window, but now their dwelling looked completely abandoned. Could they have gone to bed so early? Audrey wondered. No, they shouldn't have. I even came home a bit earlier today. She called out, "Tracy! Addie!" No one answered. The house was silent. "Kids!" she called again. Then she noticed the chill inside. Usually it was sweltering. In the summer they could have gone without heating the stove at all, but due to the lack of electricity, the stove was the only way to cook food, boil water, or heat water to wash. Today it seemed the stove hadn't been lit, and there was no food on the stove. It was as if the children had been gone for a long time and hadn't returned. Audrey tried to calm herself and think about where they might have gone. For water? They still had some left in their flask. Maybe they ran off to play. But they should have been back by now. They wouldn't have left her without dinner. A search of the house revealed nothing. All their modest belongings were in place. Audrey left the house and walked around the neighbourhood. She visited every homeless person whose shack showed signs of life, but no one knew or saw anything. Audrey barely slept that night. She listened to every sound, hoping the children would return any moment. As soon as dawn broke, she got up and searched the neighbourhood again. Still no sign of them. There was nothing more she could do. It was time to go to work. Maybe Mr. Hartman would have some advice. As she walked to the bus stop, she encountered Dwayne, a man in his 50s, also a local.
"Oh, Audrey! Who took your kids yesterday?"
Audrey turned around. "What?
You saw that someone took Tracy and Addie?
Dwayne nodded.
Yeah, a car pulled up during the day. A man and a woman got out and took your kids.
Audrey swallowed hard. Did they resist?
Dwayne pondered. I don't think so. They went willingly. Did you happen to catch the car's license plate? No, I saw them from a distance, and I had already been drinking.
Thank you, Dwayne. At work, Colin noticed her distress.
You seem strange today. What happened?
The children are missing. I came home yesterday and they were gone. She told her boss everything, including her conversation with Dwayne.
Why didn't you tell me right away? Let's think about how to find them. What are your suspicions?
I have two possibilities. Either the child welfare services or the police took them to an orphanage. Or worse, someone bad kidnapped Addie and Tracy. That's what I'm most afraid of.
Colin thought for a moment. I need to make a call. Wait here, he said, leaving the room.
He returned a few minutes later.
I called a friend. He promised to look into it, but couldn't say how long it would take.
Then he prepared breakfast himself, making coffee and sandwiches.
You need to eat, he told Audrey firmly. You'll need your strength.
Okay, she replied without much enthusiasm.
After breakfast, the phone rang. Audrey jumped up and looked at Colin.
He answered the call, listened intently, and his expression told her there was news.
Your good theory was right. The police found them. They took them to the hospital to check their condition and so on. And the main news is that their aunt wants to adopt them.
Aunt?
Audrey was surprised.
Addie and Tracy said they didn't know anything about any relatives. They're orphans like me.
We'll find out when we get there,
Colin said gently. Initially, they wouldn't let Audrey see the children, but then Colin intervened. Whether he had connections or was just persuasive, they were allowed in. Addie and Tracy were in a separate room. A stern-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in a severe suit, sat outside the office. She looked at Audrey suspiciously, but let her pass. "Addie! Tracy!" Audrey cried out as she entered the ward. When the children saw their older friend, they jumped up and without a word rushed to her. Audrey embraced them, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "I'm so glad," she sighed. "We thought we'd never see you again," Tracy sobbed. "But I knew you'd find us," Addie insisted stubbornly. Audrey smiled. "How are you? How are they treating you?" The children shrugged. "Fine," Addie replied. "Yesterday afternoon, a woman, the one sitting in the hallway, and some man came to our house. They were calm and said we didn't need to be afraid. They told us we wouldn't be taken to an orphanage. They said there's an aunt who has been looking for us for a long time." "That's wonderful," Audrey said, forcing a smile. "If she's a good person, I'll be happy for you." The children sighed. "We wanted to live with you," Tracy said. Audrey smiled sadly. "You're old enough to understand that the life we've been living isn't right," she replied. "We can't keep scavenging for food, wearing rags, living in a condemned house, and not going to school." The children looked down but said nothing. At that moment the door opened, and the woman from the hallway entered, accompanied by another woman, tall, elegant, and expensively dressed. Audrey liked her immediately. "Hi, I'm Layla," the woman introduced herself, "but you can call me Aunt Layla." Soon they were all sitting in the room. Audrey, Colin Hartman, the social worker, Aunt Layla, Addie and Tracy, talking. "The last time I saw the children was just before their mother died," Layla said, stroking the children's hair. "Addie was 4 and Tracy was just a year old." "I remember you," Addie suddenly said. "You brought me a big stuffed tiger." Layla smiled and nodded. "Then I left. For several years I travelled through South America, living like a nomad, studying the history, culture, and way of life of the locals. I had no permanent address or phone. I was so passionate about those travels. It was only much later, after I met a good man and got married, that I thought about reconnecting with my family. That's when I found out everything. I talked to my husband, and we bought tickets to come here. When I arrived, I found out you had run away. I had to pull some strings to get a proper search started. I'm so glad I found you." Then Layla turned to Audrey. "And I must thank you. You've been taking care of my niece and nephew all this time." "Audrey is like a sister to us," Tracy exclaimed, and Addie nodded vigorously. Layla smiled. "I think it's clear that I want to take custody of my niece and nephew. And Audrey, I'd like you to live with us too. We'll be here for a few months while the paperwork is processed, and then we'll go to my home. My husband and I have a large estate. You can come with us if you like." Audrey glanced back at Colin, who had been standing quietly behind her. Noticing her look, he smiled and nodded approvingly. "Thank you for the wonderful offer," Audrey replied. "I'm so happy that Addie and Tracy have found such a wonderful aunt. It's the best thing that's happened to us in a long time. I want to stay in touch and visit you kids, but I think it's time for me to build my own life." Audrey's heart ached when she saw the children's faces fall, but she knew she was doing the right thing. An hour later, Colin asked Audrey as they got into his car, "Why didn't you go with the children?" Audrey sighed. "I've been thinking about what you said," she confessed, "and how it's time for me to start a normal adult life." She suddenly fell silent and looked out the car window. "Aren't we going to your place?" "How will you get home from my place then? That's why we're going to yours. So, what are your plans for the future?" "I'll keep working for you and save money," Audrey replied. "At the same time, I'll sort out my documents. Maybe later I'll rent an apartment and go to school." As they talked, Audrey didn't notice that they had driven to the abandoned neighbourhood. "I can walk from here," she protested, embarrassed at the thought of her boss seeing where she lived. Colin frowned. "Don't be silly, Audrey." "OK then, turn left at the end of the street." He nodded and drove in the direction she indicated. "That's my house," Audrey said sullenly. She got out of the car, slammed the door and walked away, without looking back or even saying goodbye to her boss, let alone thanking him. As she opened the door and stepped inside, ready to collapse on the bed and burst into tears, she heard Colin's voice behind her. "Your place is quite cosy. I expected worse." Audrey jumped and turned around. Her boss was calmly surveying her home, as if it were an ordinary house, not the dilapidated shack of 3 homeless children that should have been demolished years ago. "You heat with a stove? And where do you get firewood?" he asked. "Dividing the territory into separate zones is original." "Why did you follow me?" Audrey asked angrily. He looked at her with surprise, as if the answer was obvious. "You said you wanted to start a new life and rent a place. Why not stay with me for a while? You won't have to spend money on commuting, and you won't have to get up at 6 in the morning." The girl looked at him suspiciously. "Mr. Hartman, are you offering me to move in with you?" "Temporarily, Audrey, temporarily. Don't think I'm offering you my heart," he said with a playful smile. "I would never think that," she retorted indignantly. Her boss smiled even wider. "So, am I too old for you?" he teased. "No, not at all," she replied. Audrey suddenly realised he was deliberately trying to embarrass her. He seemed to find the whole situation amusing. "I can't live with you, that's all," she declared. "Why not? Think about it. How does it look?" he asked, feigning thoughtfulness. "Living in a condemned house without electricity, heating or plumbing seems normal, but living at my place doesn't. If you don't trust me, then—" "Of course I trust you," Audrey interrupted, exasperated. Her head was starting to ache from the argument. "All right," she said. "I'll pack my things. It'll take 5 minutes."
She didn't have much, just clothes and shoes. She left the old dishes and bed linens behind, knowing the children wouldn't need them, and refusing to bring such things into her boss's home. "Packed in 10 minutes, Colin commented as she got into his car. "The perfect woman." "And you're quite the wit," she retorted. "I am," he agreed humbly, and started the car. At Colin's house, Audrey stayed in what she initially thought was the guest room. Later she realised it had once belonged to his stepdaughter. The room had a bed, wardrobe, desk, computer chair, mirror and dressing table. At first it felt strange to wake up in this house. However, Audrey quickly grew accustomed to the comforts. Within days she no longer marvelled at having her own shower and toilet, a luxury after a year of washing under an outdoor shower or in a basin. It was wonderful not having to wake up before dawn for work. Now, Audrey woke up at 8:30, showered, and went downstairs to prepare breakfast for 2. By then, Colin would join her, and they would eat together before he went to work, and she cleaned the house. With practice, she finished her chores early, leaving plenty of spare time. "I finished everything. Maybe there are more tasks?" Audrey asked her boss daily. He would send her to the store, the post office, or the market. But one day he said, "You're an unusual employee, Audrey. Normal people are happy when there's no work, but you go looking for it." "I just can't do nothing." "Then use this time for yourself. Work on restoring your documents. Think about which college you want to attend, and everything else." Colin even found an old laptop for Audrey and showed her how to use it. "This will speed things up," he said. 3 months later, Audrey and Colin stood at the airport, saying goodbye to Layla, Addie and Tracy. Audrey hugged them, finding it difficult to believe she wouldn't see them again for a long time. "Come visit us sometime," Tracy blurted out. "I definitely will, someday," Audrey replied. They embraced one last time. Audrey and Colin waved goodbye to the children until they disappeared behind the security checkpoint with Layla. "How are you feeling?" Colin asked as they got into the car. "I'm okay," Audrey replied. "I've thought a lot about how things would turn out for all of us, and this is such a good outcome for Tracy and Addie that I couldn't have imagined it even in my wildest dreams. Now I can just be happy for them." "You had to grow up too fast," Colin said. "Girls your age shouldn't have to think about such serious things. Most of your peers are studying at university and living happy, carefree lives." "You sound like an old man," Audrey teased. "I'm old enough to be your father," he replied. "I don't know. You look more like my older brother. Anyway, I think we have a great friendship. Let's go grab something to eat." "I can cook at home," Audrey protested. "Relax," Colin said cheerfully. "Consider today your day off." "But I hardly do anything all day. I cook a little and clean, which takes a couple of hours at most." "You're right," he admitted. "You work criminally little. We need to fix that immediately." Seeing her alarmed expression, he laughed. "Don't look so scared. I have an idea." He shared his plan over lunch. "I've been offered a consulting job on a film shoot. They have the main script but need help with the details. I'll be overseeing the entire shooting process and need an assistant. What do you say?" "I'm in," Audrey agreed. "As if I gave you a choice," he teased. Audrey enjoyed being on the film set. The atmosphere was unique and chaotic, with people rushing around constantly. On her first day, she was afraid of being knocked over and stayed close to Colin. He smiled, seeing her frightened face. "Don't worry," he said during a break. "I almost lost my mind the first time I was here. You'll get used to it in a couple of days." "I'm scared," Audrey admitted. "They're all crazy here." "They are," Colin agreed. "And you'll become just like them soon." Audrey looked at him sceptically, but he seemed serious. "You haven't seen me in action yet," he added. At first, Audrey didn't understand what he meant, but then Colin had a heated argument with the director. She had never seen him so angry. "You called me to turn this nonsense into something resembling a film?" Colin shouted. "And that's what I'm doing," the director retorted. "I know best how this scene should look." What surprised Audrey the most was how everyone else on set, actors, assistants, makeup artists, cameramen, seemed unfazed, as if nothing unusual was happening. 15 minutes later, during a break, Audrey saw Colin and the director chatting calmly by the coffee machine. "Is this normal?" she asked one of the cameramen. He barely understood her question. "You mean the arguing?" "Yeah, it happens. You can't make a movie without a few fights." A month later, Audrey realised she had grown accustomed to this life. She could hardly remember being homeless and scavenging for food. Now she had a job, 2 in fact, and plans to attend college the following year and find her own apartment. Strangely, Audrey didn't want to move out. Sometimes she even wondered if she was in love with her boss. She had never been in love before, so she had nothing to compare it to, but she knew that she couldn't help but smile every time she heard his footsteps in the morning as he came downstairs for breakfast. She could listen for hours as he explained to the film crew how and why a scene should be done a certain way. And she thought she had never seen anyone more attractive. Sometimes she even imagined that Colin looked at her in a special way, but she quickly dismissed such bold fantasies. A man like Colin Hartman would never be interested in someone like her. He was only being kind, and she happened to be there for him during those gloomy months. Now she saw him flourish with each day spent on the film set. When it was all over, she would go to college and move away. Colin would forget about her in a matter of days. The thought saddened her, but Audrey decided to enjoy the time they had together now. They spent almost every moment together, and apart from him, she only interacted with colleagues at work and occasionally called Addie and Tracy. They were doing well, exploring the vast estate, enjoying the local cuisine, and appreciating the mild climate. They also liked Layla's husband, who was kind and welcoming. "How are the kids?" Colin asked after Audrey hung up. "They're doing well. They send their regards," she replied. "Thank you," Colin said, then hesitated before asking, "Would you like to go out for dinner tonight?" Audrey looked at him in surprise. "I've already made stuffed cabbage rolls with mashed potatoes. Don't you like them?" she asked. He smiled gently. "I like everything you cook. Let's save them for tomorrow. I feel like going out tonight." "All right," Audrey agreed. Colin took her to a small but cosy restaurant. Audrey worried she would be embarrassed, having never been to a restaurant before, but they were seated at a private table, separated from the main dining area by semi-transparent curtains. With Colin by her side, she felt comfortable and at ease. "What would you like?" he asked. Audrey scanned the menu. "I don't know, maybe you could choose," she suggested. "All right," he agreed. After they ordered, Audrey looked around. "I like it here," she admitted. "I'm glad. We should come here more often," Colin said. "That's not what I meant," Audrey clarified. "But it's what I meant," he insisted, looking at her with a slight frown but a smile. Audrey blushed and looked down. "I don't want to get used to this," she said softly. "To what?" Colin asked, confused. "Spending so much time with you, getting attached, thinking it will last," she explained. Colin opened his mouth to respond, but a sharp female voice interrupted them. "So, it's true? I thought it was just a rumour." Audrey looked up and recognised the woman as Norma, Colin's ex-wife, and the mother of his late stepdaughter, Jenny. "Good evening, Norma," Colin greeted her calmly. "What are you doing here?" "I came for dinner and ran into you," Norma replied, looking at Audrey with disdain. "I've heard rumours that you're having an affair with your young assistant, and that she even lives with you. I didn't believe you would stoop so low. Well, I guess breaking up with me and being alone got to you." Colin straightened in his chair. "Audrey works for me, and our relationship is strictly professional. Besides, it's none of your business." "None of my business?" Norma repeated. "We were married for years. You considered Jenny your daughter." Colin sighed heavily. "I loved Jenny with all my heart, you know that." "And what about me?" Norma demanded. Audrey couldn't bear it any longer. "I'll go," she said quickly, standing up. "You two need to talk." She rushed out of the restaurant, pulling on her coat as she went. She had the house keys and money for a taxi, but she wondered if she should return to Colin's home. Where else could she go? Back to the streets? No, she had a job, a place to live, and opportunities for the future. She couldn't throw it all away over something so trivial. And honestly, Colin was not trivial to her. Audrey realised that he occupied a significant place in her heart, more than a boss or even a good friend should. But to him, she was practically nobody, especially now that his ex-wife had reappeared. Back at the house, Audrey felt the emptiness without Colin. She washed up and went to bed, but couldn't sleep. She heard Colin return 2 hours later. The next day, neither of them mentioned what had happened. Colin seemed lost in thought, and Audrey assumed Norma had proposed they get back together. She tried not to show her distress, but inside she was overwhelmed with pain and longing. Why was life so unfair? Why did fate take away the people she cared about as soon as they entered her life? At least the children were happy, she thought, trying to find some comfort in that. And Colin will probably be happy with his Norma, but that doesn't make it any easier for Audrey. Yet she will endure. "You've been strange lately," Colin said to her. "You've lost weight. You're always silent. It's like you're thinking about something. Has someone upset you? Maybe me?" "Everything is fine. I'm just tired from work." "Do you want me to give you a short break? You can stay home for a week, or you'll wear yourself out. You won't need to cook or clean either. I'll manage." He wants to be gentle with me before Norma arrives and shows who the real mistress of this house is. No way. I'll leave before she gets here, Audrey thought, and said aloud, "No, I don't want a break." "You are the most stubborn girl in the world, you know that." "As if you're any different," Audrey said. "You're barely standing on your feet, but you'll still argue with the director until the end." "It's all because of you. When I see how you look at me, I find strength from somewhere." "You said I need to gain experience, so I always look at you and I listen intently to how you shout at everyone." Colin laughed. "What a pity. I was hoping it was because of my irresistible charm, charisma, and oratory skills." "Why is he teasing me like this?" Audrey thought. "He must know that I like him. How cruel to laugh at my feelings, especially now he's about to reunite with his ex-wife." She proudly lifted her head and replied, "Anyway, we won't be working together much longer. The filming will end soon." "It will end," Colin agreed. "But we'll still be together, at least in my house." "But I'm going to enroll to the college, so I won't be able to work for you and study at the same time. I'll live in the dormitory as soon as I enroll, and if you need me to leave your house earlier, I'll leave earlier." Colin raised his eyebrows in surprise and wanted to say something, but he didn't have time. The break was over, and everyone was called back to the set. A few days later, they had their first real day off. "So, where should we go?" Colin asked cheerfully. Audrey hesitated. "I don't know. I haven't done a thorough cleaning in a long time." "Forget about it. The house is clean. We're hardly ever here anyway. Let's have some fun instead. Especially since our last evening was ruined. before it even started.
All right, Audrey sighed. They were just discussing where to go when Colin received a message. He looked at the screen and sighed. How does she do it? Then he looked at Audrey and smiled guiltily. I'm sorry, dear. Our outing is cancelled for today. My ex-wife is coming over. It seems we're about to have an interesting conversation. I understand everything, she replied. I'll be in my room. There, she sat on the bed and pondered. Colin had such a strange smile. They're probably going to make up and decide to live together now. So what am I waiting for here? She decidedly stood up and began calmly packing her things. Downstairs, Norma's voice could already be heard. She arrived quickly. Audrey didn't want to leave demonstratively while the former spouses were talking. She decided to wait until everything quieted down and then slip out of the house quietly. Today she could spend the night in a hostel, and tomorrow she would think about a more suitable dwelling. Finally, the voices fell silent. Audrey waited a few more minutes to be sure, then took her suitcase, peeked out of the room, and headed for the front door. And where do you think you're going? Colin's voice suddenly sounded behind her. He was standing in the doorway with a cup in his hands. What's with the secret runaway? Did I offend you? Or do you have a secret admirer, and you're secretly running away to him, not daring to break my heart? I just didn't want to interfere with your reunion with your ex-wife. What? Colin seemed genuinely surprised. Are you jealous of me? Audrey felt herself blushing. Well, I never, she said in a breaking voice. I have better things to do. Then tell me what's going on. I thought we were getting along great, and then suddenly you're packing your things and trying to leave without even telling me. You and Norma are planning to get back together, and I don't want to get in your way. In the restaurant you talked for 2 hours, and after that, you weren't yourself. You kept walking around thinking about something, and today she came, Audrey said, almost crying. Women, you'll drive me crazy, he sighed. There's nothing between me and Norma. That day in the restaurant, she accidentally saw us, and after you left, we just talked. She even cried because of Jenny. I sat with her and sent her home. And today? Audrey asked quietly. Today she came to apologize. She even wanted to talk to you, but I said it was better not to. She left. Audrey looked at him disbelievingly. You're not planning to get back together with her? He smiled. No. Besides, I've liked another girl for a long time. Who? You can't mean me, because I'm homeless, poor and uneducated. Well, you know how to choose words, but you forgot to mention how wonderful, smart, honest, kind, caring, beautiful, and strong-spirited you are. So, you really like me? Like you? I've been in love with you for a long time. She blushed. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't think such a young and beautiful girl could like an old, boring man like me. Audrey laughed and suddenly threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. It seems you're not as smart as I thought, she said after the kiss. You also took too long to notice the obvious. I hope together we won't miss anything important. Colin hugged her and pulled her close. Indeed. Now we'll have to try harder.